Chapter 810. Feng Ling was about to stand up on the reef, but as soon as she got up, she staggered because of the sharp pain in her back and chest. Xiao Fei, who was standing to the side and preparing to jump down from the reef, quickly reached out to support her. He then lowered his head to look at her, using his eyes to ask if she could hold on. Feng Ling shook her head calmly and said in a low voice, "I'm fine." "You're hurt." Nanheng came over, glanced at Xiao Fei's action of holding Feng Ling's arm, turned his eyes away, and looked at Feng Ling's pale face. "The rescue team said you were injured on the cruise ship and disappeared after falling into the sea. Xiao Fei jumped into the sea to save you. How are you? Is it very serious? Why did you drift to such an island? Were you far from the coastline just now?" Before Feng Ling could speak, Xiao Fei directly said, "Boss, I'm fine." In order to save the mayor's wife, Feng Ling accompanied her on the cruise for too long. At that time, she even gave her life jacket and gas mask to the child, causing her to inhale a large amount of smoke. Later, she was affected by the explosion. I think her injuries are indeed serious. When we return, we must immediately send her to the hospital for a checkup. It's not as serious as Deputy Drillmaster Qiao said. "Boss, I'm not." Before Feng Ling finished speaking, Nanheng heard her hoarse and abnormal voice, and his face darkened. Without listening to her nonsense, he turned back and ordered someone to help her and Xiao Fei down from the reef. When Xiao Fei let go of Feng Ling's hand, he glanced at her. Seeing that she had put on her clothes again, he didn't see anything wrong with her, so he boarded the helicopter with ease. Feng Ling, on the other hand, was different. She was seriously injured. Earlier, Xiao Fei had been supporting her. Right now, Feng Ling was struggling to even take a few steps. It was clear that she had been injured by the explosion. It was just that the flames from the explosion did not directly reach her body. Thankfully, it was the sea below. Otherwise, Feng Ling would have been charred black. Even her hair would have been burnt off. After Xiao Su helped Feng Ling onto the helicopter, Nanheng calmly ordered, "Team 3, take all the lightly injured members back to the base infirmary. Han Jin, Bao, stay here to check all the rescue helicopters. Team 4 and Team 5, return to the base training ground and continue to stand by." With that, he hurried back to the helicopter. When he entered the cabin, he saw Feng Ling, who had just been helped into the cabin. Feng Ling turned to look at the man who came back from outside. At this time, the overall situation was the most important. The man's calm expression and tone when he spoke into the headset made Feng Ling feel extremely at ease. It seemed that no matter what happened, this man would not easily frown. No matter what, he could calmly and rationally arrange everything. He was responsible for everyone in the base and would never care about this. The helicopter took off again. Xiao Fei was in another plane. In this plane, there were only Xiao Su, Nanheng, and Feng Ling in the cockpit. The sound of the propeller was too loud. Feng Ling found another headset at the back and put it on. Li Nanheng's concise follow-up orders echoed in her ears. When she flew over the sea near the coastline, she saw thick smoke billowing below. The fire on the cruise ship had long been swallowed by the waves, leaving only some black smoke. However, above the abandoned warehouse that had just been blown up, the fire was still soaring into the sky. Li Nanheng was calm and collected, methodically giving orders. 10 helicopters, dozens of team members all listened to his arrangements. After arranging all the follow-up matters, Nanheng took off the headset on his head and tossed it aside. He went to the cockpit and gave a few words to Xiao Su. When he looked back, Feng Ling, who was sitting in the back of the fuselage, seemed to have not recovered from the end of the mission. He walked over to her. When he came to her side, he lowered his eyes to look at her still pale face. "Fly directly to the Los Angeles hospital. There is a spare helipad there. The helicopter can be parked there." Feng Ling hesitated for a moment and said, "Boss, there's no need to go through so much trouble. I'll just go to the hospital for a simple checkup. The helicopter is a public means of transportation for the base. I can't fly to the hospital because of my personal situation. You were injured by the explosion during a mission. Sending you to the hospital is not a personal matter. But, don't talk nonsense. Where does it hurt? I don't know if it's an internal injury as others have said, but it should be. because my internal organs seem to have been shaken. It hurts so much right now. Feng Ling looked at his serious and calm eyes, and instinctively answered truthfully. The oil tank on the cruise exploded. You're lucky you didn't die on the spot. Go to the hospital for a checkup first. If it's serious, you can be hospitalized for surgery. You can return to the base after you've completely recovered. Feng Ling didn't speak anymore. She wasn't sure if her injuries were serious or not. There was no blood on the surface, but her body was indeed in pain. She could only wait for the hospital to find out the truth before deciding anything else. Although Feng Ling didn't speak, her expression was somewhat solemn. Nanheng glanced at the other helicopters, walked up to her with his long legs, and sat by her side. He asked mildly, "How do you feel about your first mission like this?" "My heart is very excited." Feng Ling's answer was very official. Her voice was hoarse, but her tone was calm. Nanheng sneered. "With your abilities, I can easily hand the mission of fighting the terrorists to you. Don't think that I'm denying your abilities by sending you to the cruise. Both sides need people with their own strengths. You and Xiaofei are good swimmers. If it was anyone else on the cruise, they might not be able to do better than you. Besides, this kind of mission that others think is easy is actually the most difficult. Now that the mission has been successfully completed, I believe you understand what I'm saying." It was indeed very difficult. When facing the terrorists, she only needed to think of a way to protect her own life, and then think of a way to kill the other party. But on the cruise, she had to risk her own life every time to protect others, especially that 3-year-old child, who was already scared stiff. Feng Ling coughed, but she turned her back to Nanheng, and coughed a few more times. After she felt more comfortable, she turned to look at the man by her side. At that time, Mayor Ted's wife refused to jump down no matter what. There was a delay of about 3 to 4 minutes. Otherwise, we could have safely avoided the explosion. Chapter 8:11. The man's voice was filled with patience and gentleness that Feng Ling had never heard before. Feng Ling thought that she had heard wrongly, but he suddenly stuffed 2 folded jackets into her back, allowing her to lean more comfortably. The man's movements were also natural, as though this was a normal thing. Feng Ling was startled and looked at him. Li Nanheng glanced at her calmly. "What are you looking at? The base has always treated the wounded on missions so humanely. You're already injured. I can't mistreat you anymore." Feng Ling. "Boss, would it kill you to say something nice? Or would you die if I told you to do more heartwarming things?" The helicopter arrived at the largest hospital in the center of Los Angeles. Xiaofei was directly sent back to the base on another plane. During this period, there was no way to contact him, but Feng Ling felt that Xiaofei's character was not bad, and he was reliable. He probably wouldn't tell anyone about her. So she didn't worry too much, and directly entered the hospital according to Boss Li's arrangement. However, Feng Ling had never been seriously injured before, so the examination this time was very comprehensive, which meant that her gender couldn't be hidden in the medical field. While Nanheng was outside on the phone with the people in the base hall, she sat in the consulting room and told the doctor about her situation, including that she was actually a woman, but in order to find a suitable place for her to survive, she had to disguise herself as a man. Except for lying to others about her gender, she did not do anything outrageous. She told the doctor that she had been an orphan since she was a child, and that she had finally found a home to return to. She also said that if her gender was exposed, she might get into a lot of trouble, including the military and the police in the hospital. She told the doctor a lot of half-truths, half-lies, half-truths, 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 half-truths. The doctor was an old man about 50 years old. He was an American, but Feng Ling grew up in the United States, so she was fluent in both Chinese and English, and expressed herself very clearly. The doctor pushed the glasses on the bridge of his nose, asked her a few more questions, and then agreed that if her superior didn't specifically ask about her gender, he wouldn't casually expose this kind of thing, nor would he mention it, but if her superior specifically asked about her gender, he wouldn't lie and could only answer truthfully. To receive such a reply was already a very good result for Feng Ling. After all, she was not related to the doctor, and it was her first time meeting him. The doctor did not even know her background. The only thing she could do was not to stir up trouble, but at the same time, she could not deliberately lie. That would depend on her own luck. Feng Ling's lungs were indeed affected by the smoke, but it wasn't as serious as she had imagined. She didn't need to undergo surgery, but she still had to be hospitalized. She would have to rest in the hospital for at least a week. Hearing that there would be no surgery, Feng Ling's mood instantly relaxed. She was not afraid of surgery, but she was afraid that after the surgery, she would be unconscious because of the anesthesia. If Boss Lee helped her change her clothes in the ward, or lifted the quilt to wipe her body, he would definitely find out that she was a woman, and then she would really die. Feng Ling's eyes lit up. That day, Feng Ling was left in the hospital. After Nan Heng confirmed with the doctor that there was no major problem with her, he first went to the ward to take a look. At that time, Feng Ling was sitting on the hospital bed doing an aerosol inhalation. She held an aerosol machine in her hand and stuck it to her nose and mouth, constantly inhaling the drug gas. Because she had choked on water earlier, Feng Ling still felt pain in her throat and nasal cavity. The doctor had previously said that this was a normal phenomenon, and that it would no longer hurt in 2 days. The military has gone to the base. I'll go back to the base first. I'll come back after the mission is completely finished. Xiao Su will stay to accompany you. If you have any questions, just tell Xiao Su, Nan Heng said to her. Feng Ling removed the atomizer from her nose. All right, boss, you don't have to come to see me. I'll cooperate with the treatment and return to the base as soon as possible. I won't delay the sniper team's training. You're already so injured, what's the point of training? Take care of yourself first. With that, Nan Heng's cell phone rang again. He had just finished a major mission, but he did not directly return to the base. Instead, he brought people to the hospital. Over there, both the military and the members of the base were about to explode. Nan Heng's expression was cold and heavy. He picked up his cell phone and turned to walk out. Feng Ling watched as he closed the door and did not speak. She continued to pick up the atomizer and put it between her mouth and nose. The sky gradually darkened. Xiao Su pushed the door open and came in. He saw that Feng Ling had already finished the atomizer and was leaning against the hospital bed, looking at her cell phone. Good, your injury is really ingenious. The injury is very serious, but there is no need for surgery. You just lie in the ward and don't need to do anything. You just need to rest for a week, Xiao Su said with a smile, as he placed the dinner he had just bought for Feng Ling on the table by her bed. Feng Ling put down her cell phone and glanced at him. If you were injured like this, would you try it? When you really lie here in discomfort, you won't be able to say such words. I know how uncomfortable it is. When I first entered the base, I also participated in a rescue mission like this. At that time, in a 30-story building, there was a fire, and there was poisonous gas in the room. I inhaled a lot of it at that time. Later, my lungs hurt for a long time. It was uncomfortable to lie down, sit down, and stand. I couldn't stop wishing I could die, Xiao Su said with a smile. So I can understand how you feel. But anyway, boss personally asked you to rest here. So you didn't get injured for nothing. After being in the base for so long, it's rare for you to have a chance to rest like this. That's true. Usually apart from missions, it's training. I really don't have a chance to lie down for a whole day like this. Feng Ling smiled. In fact, boss also has a plan in his heart. If the situation on the cruise is particularly dangerous, he probably won't let you go. Why? Isn't it because I'm good at swimming that he allowed me to go? Xiao Su shook his head. In the most dangerous situations, boss will personally go. Just like the terrorists we faced today. Every one of them had guns and bombs in their hands. In the warehouse, there are also various firearms bought from the underground mafia. That includes the ambushes all around us. That is the real danger. Xiao Su shook his head. Feng Ling looked at him. Chapter 8:12. Do you often go on missions with boss? Feng Ling asked. Xiao Su thought for a moment. More or less. I've been by boss's side for many years. Back then, I was in my teens just like you. I've been in the base for so many years. It won't be long before I leave the base to work at the American police station. To be honest, I'm quite reluctant to leave. After all, This place is no different from home to me. In a situation like today, facing the terrorists, in addition to the explosion of the warehouse below, in such a dangerous situation, if boss told you to jump out of the plane to rescue them, would you jump? I would. He did not hesitate. Even if I would be buried in a sea of fire, blown to death, or even crippled for life, would I still jump? I still have to jump. Feng Ling's expression softened. That's why saving Mayor Ted's wife and child on the cruise was a mission I had to do, regardless of whether it was because of the mission or because of human nature. I did what I had to do. I didn't hesitate when I shouldn't have. Right now, it's already good enough that I'm still alive. You don't have to specially take care of me. I'm fine. He did not expect that after asking so many questions, Feng Ling would only ask them not to take her injuries to heart. This brat, despite his young age, had a steady personality. Who would have thought that he would be so well behaved? It was impossible to dislike him at all. In fact, he even liked this brat from the bottom of his heart. Of course, with Boss Lee around, Xiao Su's fondness for Feng Ling was limited to that of a big brother to a little brother. He did not dare to have any other thoughts. Furthermore, Xiao Su swore that he was absolutely straight. After so many years in the base, he had never had any feelings for any man. However, towards Feng Ling, it was as though he was watching a child grow up bit by bit. Hearing Feng Ling's words, Xiao Su was very gratified. The sky outside the window had already darkened. Feng Ling picked up the food Xiao Su bought and ate some. Boss Lee did not return. Throughout the entire time, Xiao Su accompanied her and took care of her. There were many matters in the base waiting for Boss to return and resolve. He had specially left Xiao Su here. Feng Ling understood the importance Boss placed on her. Boss was also very concerned about the injuries of the members of the base. This was enough to prove that he was indeed not an overly cold person. Everything that had happened on this mission was also a form of growth for Feng Ling. In times of crisis, Instructor Qiao's orderly manner showed that they were soldiers who had been through hundreds of battles. She was only a half-baked newbie. She was considered outstanding among the newbies, but among the elites and seniors of the base, she was still a newbie who needed to be trained and grew. In the evening, Xiao Su went to the lounge next door. After Feng Ling took the medicine, she did another aerosol treatment under the doctor's instructions. This time, after the treatment, she felt that her chest and lungs were no longer burning with pain. She just didn't know if she could have a good sleep. Before going to bed, she sent a message to Xiao Su and asked for some electronic information from the base. Then lying on the hospital bed to read. He had read a lot of professional terms and detailed summaries about base extermination missions and rescue missions. Then, he looked at the helicopter's heat resistance and the pilot's information. There were also some special code words that only the people in the base knew. As she read, she used the pen that she had borrowed from the doctor to write on a piece of paper. The tip of the pen moved swiftly, and she tried hard to recall the words that Boss Lee had said to the base. Then, she continued to send messages to Xiao Su, asking him about Boss Lee's orders and other aspects that she needed to know in times of crisis. At 9 in the evening, Feng Ling was still reading the information on her phone when the door to the ward was suddenly pushed open. She paused and raised her head from the phone screen to see Li Nanheng, who had actually returned to the hospital. The man by the door paused for a moment before sending over a simple sentence. "You're injured to this extent, yet you're not sleeping?" The man's voice was low and clean, as though it was a steady and beautiful musical instrument. From his tone and expression, it was likely that the matters at the base and with the American military had already been settled. There was no need for him to worry about any battle plans with the terrorists. She wasn't sure if it was because she was injured, but the man's tone toward her today had become much gentler. It was just a simple sentence, but it strangely stirred her heart. Feng Ling abruptly placed the pen and paper in her hands on the table by the bed. At the same time, she placed her phone by the side. At this moment, Li Nanheng also opened the door. Originally, there was only one emergency lamp by the bedside. Right now, due to the light from the corridor outside, it was much brighter. The man stood against the light, his figure tall and slender. Feng Ling glanced in his direction. It was already so late, yet Boss Lee had suddenly returned. She didn't know why she suddenly felt nervous. She directly asked him, "Boss, why did you return to the hospital? Is there something you need from me?" Li Nanheng looked at the slightly pale fellow lying on the bed and casually turned on the light in the ward. The moment the light turned on, he walked over and stood by the bedside. He looked down at the person sitting on the bed and then at the loose, light blue hospital gown that Feng Ling was wearing. They were used to wearing black uniforms in the base. Everyone wore black from head to toe. It was rare to see Feng Ling wearing light-colored clothes. Her pale skin was so white that it was almost translucent. It was tempting to reach up and touch her. He looked at her calmly and said in an indiscernible tone, "The base is fine. You're injured. I can't just leave you here." Feng Ling paused. "But it's already very late. If you rush back to the base, you'll have to drive for a long time. Won't it be troublesome?" Nanheng took off the jacket of his uniform and casually threw it on the simple sofa by the window of the ward. Wearing only a black t-shirt, he said lightly, "I'll stay here tonight. I'll go back tomorrow morning." Feng Ling. "Stay here? Boss, you want to stay in the hospital? Stay in my ward." "What? No." Li Nanheng walked to the simple bathroom in the other direction of the ward without looking back and replied stiffly, "If any member of the base is injured, I will come to take a look. As you said, it's too late now. It'll be troublesome to drive back. Why don't you just stay here? This ward doesn't lack anything. The sofa is big enough for one person to sleep on. Is there a problem with me staying here?" When he passed by the end of the bed, he glanced at the pen and paper she had just placed on the table by the bed. "Xiao Su said that you're cramming all the dangerous mission knowledge in the base based on today's mission. You only learn to cram when you're injured. You're really promising. Dash." Chapter 813. However, when his gaze fell on the contents of the paper, Nanheng's footsteps faltered. He abruptly walked around the bed and picked up the paper. Feng Ling had actually written down everything he had said. Seeing that he was looking at what she had written, Feng Ling's heart tightened. She rushed to explain, "I want to quickly get used to the high-frequency and dangerous missions in the future. Since boss brought me along this time, I will definitely have the opportunity to go on such missions with you guys next time. Also, I need to understand the professional jargon boss mentioned on the helicopter. Otherwise, I'm afraid that I'll drag everyone down if I don't understand it. I have to get used to the language environment under such intense missions." Nanheng was silent for a moment. He put down the paper and continued to walk toward the bathroom. It wasn't until she heard the sound of the man showering that Feng Ling realized that boss was still wearing the clothes he had worn during the day. After returning to the base and finishing up everything, he actually rushed back to the hospital without even changing his clothes or showering. Usually, Boss Lee seemed to have a serious obsession with cleanliness. Usually, when he returned to the base, he would wash up immediately. However, this time, he had rushed back to the hospital. In the past few years, although Feng Ling often hung out with the group of men in the base, she had never shared a room with anyone. Even when she showered, she always had her own room. Right now, hearing the sound of water coming from the bathroom, Feng Ling's expression faltered at the thought of boss showering inside. She picked up the pen, paper, and cell phone on the table again. She continued to recall what boss had said during the day to distract herself from listening carefully to the movements in the bathroom. 20 minutes later, the bathroom door opened. Feng Ling heard the sound, but didn't think much. She subconsciously raised her eyes to look in the direction of the sound. However, she saw that Nanheng was not wearing any clothes on his upper body. There were even water droplets dripping down his short hair. He only had a white disinfectant towel wrapped around his lower body as he walked out. Feng Ling didn't expect that a man would come out after showering without any clothes on. Her gaze fell on his bare upper body. She had seen Kay and the others bare-chested during training, but when she saw the towel wrapped around his lower body, her mind exploded. She abruptly sat up from the bed and rushed over. She ran past him and opened the bathroom door behind him to look in, only to see that the clothes he had changed out of were thrown into the sink by the side. If she didn't wash them, she wouldn't be able to wear them again. She could only close the bathroom door. When she turned back, her eyes met Nanheng's gaze. For a moment, The ward fell into a strange silence. What are you looking for? The man saw her suddenly jumped out of bed and ran over in a hurry, and his eyes were inexplicable. Feng Ling. Boss, didn't you bring spare clothes? Nanheng glanced at her coldly and casually tied the towel around his waist more tightly. With his back facing her, he walked to the sofa and picked up his phone to call Xiao Su. Go buy me a set of clothes in the right size nearby. After hanging up the phone, the man glanced at the guy who was standing stiffly by the bathroom door. Why are you in a daze? We're both men. Did taking a shower touch your abnormal nerve? Feng Ling. He casually picked up the jacket that had been thrown on the sofa and took out a cigarette. He was about to light one, but the moment the lighter lit up, he paused and extinguished it. He turned back to look at the person who had returned to the bedside and remembered that Feng Ling's lungs were having some problems from the smoke. If he smoked in the ward, it would be a second injury to Feng Ling's lungs. The man bent down again and threw the cigarette and lighter back onto his jacket. He said lightly, "You don't have to look at me so nervously. I won't smoke anymore. You should rest when you need to. You don't have to look at me." Feng Ling thought to herself, "Boss, how can I rest when you're here? As long as you're around, I'm used to being as tense as a spring. I instinctively feel that I should do 50 frog jumps on the spot, okay?" However, she didn't say this out loud. She just returned to the bed and covered the bed with the quilt again. Then she looked at the man who was standing by the sofa and looking out of the window indifferently. With the moonlight shining in from the window and the faint light in the room, Feng Ling finally had a chance to carefully look at the man's side profile in such a quiet moment. Li Nanheng was really good looking, and he didn't lose the slightest bit of his masculinity. He was full of hormones, but he wasn't the type that made people feel scared at the sight of him. Instead, he was handsome. When he smiled, the whole world seemed to light up, making all the members relax. When he was serious, it made people tense up all over. And when he was cold, it made people feel as though the god of death had arrived. But it was such a man who she had accidentally provoked in the sauna room of the orphanage. Feng Ling really didn't expect that in the future. She would have so much contact with him in the future. She lived and grew up in 11 base, which was equivalent to growing up under this man's strong wings. As if sensing the boy's strange gaze, Li Nanheng paused by the window and looked back at her. What are you looking at? Feng Ling. Boss, there's a lounge next to it. Xiao Su said that there are 2 beds in the lounge. Won't it be too hard for you to sleep on the sofa in the ward? Why don't you sleep on the bed next door with Xiao Su? Li Nanheng narrowed his eyes. Is there anything else in the lounge besides the bed? Feng Ling. There should be a bathroom. You want me to sleep next to the bathroom? Feng Ling paused and then said, How about boss? If you really want to stay here, I definitely can't make it hard for you. You sleep on my bed, and I'll sleep on the sofa. Li Nanheng's voice was cold. I'm fine. You want me to sleep on the hospital bed? Are you cursing me? I just can't watch you sleep on the sofa, boss. Why don't I ask the hospital to arrange a more luxurious lounge for you? Or there should be a hotel nearby. Boss, you can stay there for a night. There's no need to go through so much trouble. It's good here. The man turned and sat directly on the sofa. His sitting posture caused the man's slender and strong legs to be casually open. Such a small towel could barely cover the scenery of the man's legs. Chapter 8:14. Perhaps it was because the ward was too quiet. Or perhaps Feng Ling was used to living alone in a room. In this medium-sized ward, she seemed to be able to hear the man's steady breathing when she closed her eyes, which sounded particularly pleasant in the quiet night. She had never thought that a person's breathing could attract her attention. Feng Ling closed her eyes for a while and really didn't dare to look at the sofa, but she could roughly hear what was going on. For example, she vaguely heard the man change his position on the sofa. He should be leaning against the side where there was a pillow. Thinking of Boss Li's usual behavior, she guessed that at this moment, the man should be casually stretching his limbs and leaning against the sofa to relax. Then she heard the sound of a cell phone, but it only rang a few times before it turned to silent. Boss Li must have muted the phone, because he was afraid of disturbing her. After lying stiffly for a while, Feng Ling turned over on the bed. Still not sleeping? The man's voice rang casually, which was particularly clear and quiet in the quiet night. Feng Ling turned her back to the man on the sofa, opened her eyes and said softly, "Yes, I'm going to sleep soon. Do you feel uncomfortable?" "No, I had 2 inhalations today and feel much better. I should be able to leave the hospital in less than a week. I don't think it's too serious." "The doctor asked you to stay in the hospital for observation for a week, so stay for a week. It doesn't matter if you are here or not. Rest assured and don't rush back." After the man's voice fell, the ward returned to silence. Feng Ling didn't speak anymore, but just closed her eyes. About half an hour later, there was a light knock on the door, and then Xiao Su came in. Seeing that Feng Ling was lying on the bed, he walked over lightly and put a set of clothes he had just bought on the sofa. "Boss, try this set of clothes to see if it fits you. I bought it according to your usual size. It should be about the same." "Well, okay, go to rest." Li Nanheng took out the clothes from the bag and gestured for Xiao Su to go back to the rest room to rest early. Xiao Su nodded. After all, it was too late. It was not good to talk in this ward, so he turned around and walked out. The ward returned to silence. Nanheng spread out the newly bought clothes and was about to change into them by the sofa. He paused and looked at Feng Ling, who was lying on the bed with her back to him. Normally speaking, they were all men, and there was nothing to avoid. However, he didn't know if it was because Feng Ling was avoiding him, or because he had an inexplicable feeling for Feng Ling. But he felt that it was indeed inappropriate to change his clothes here. The man directly took the clothes into the simple bathroom. After changing, he conveniently took the dirty clothes in the sink and the black combat jacket placed on the sofa outside into the bathroom to wash them. Hearing the sound of washing clothes in the bathroom, Feng Ling opened her eyes again. In the blink of an eye, she saw a man wearing a black shirt and black casual pants. Although the management system of 11 Base was not as strict as that of the domestic army, it was almost the same. Everyone's clothes were also washed by themselves. However, Boss Li's subordinates would often fight to wash his clothes, but Boss had never allowed them to wash his clothes. Sometimes, everyone would even speculate if the Li family had arranged for a housekeeper or an auntie in the base. It was just that they hadn't noticed. Otherwise, why would Boss Li's clothes be so clean? From the looks of it now, his clothes were indeed washed by himself. Even if this was the young master of the Li family, he had been sent to 11 Base from a young age. He was likely long used to doing things by himself, and did not have the illness of a rich young master. Although there were simple washrooms and bathrooms in the hospital ward, it wasn't a suitable place to wash clothes. Nanheng picked up a piece of antiseptic soap from the side and casually washed away the dirt and bloodstains on his clothes. At the very least, his clothes didn't look as dirty as before he washed them with clean water and hung them in the bathroom. He planned to wash them again in the washing machine when he returned to the base. The man walked out of the bathroom and turned to see Feng Ling, who had unknowingly opened her eyes again. His cold brows furrowed. The moment their eyes met, Feng Ling thought for a moment and sat up from the bed. "Boss, I can't sleep. Why don't you tell me about the things to take note of when confronting terrorists? If there's such a mission in the future, I can also be on the front lines," Feng Ling said as she sat up. "There aren't many things to take note of. A mission is just a mission. While completing the mission, the most important thing is to remember to protect your own life. 11 Base doesn't have such brainwashing ideas of sacrificing one's life for the country. We are only a semi-military base serving all the countries included in the United Nations. We are responsible for all aspects of security. The United States and China are the most important, because these two countries have the most people in the base, especially the Chinese." The man's tone was calm. "While completing the mission, you must bring your own life back. This is the most basic principle. Everything else depends on adapting to the situation. If your body can't take it, just a little blood loss will cause you to die. If you can take it, even if you bleed for a day, you can still be saved. This is the importance of physical fitness." Feng Ling understood what he meant. "Right now, I'm working very hard to increase the endurance of my body. Give me a little more time, and I will definitely not be inferior to the others in the sniper team." You aren't inferior to anyone else, but you are indeed too skinny. The man looked at the large light blue hospital gown she was wearing. The gown was overly loose on her, as though a child had stolen an adult's clothes. Feng Ling really had no way of dealing with this. She had already worked very hard to increase her muscles, but a woman's body was originally different from a man's. Perhaps a man's long-term training would allow him to develop all sorts of sturdy muscles. But as a woman, she belonged to the category of women who were slightly taller than other women, but her bones were very thin. No matter how much she ate or how much she trained, the most she could do was appear slightly healthier than other women. At most, when she exerted herself in certain movements, her arms and calves would show a slight hint of sporty female muscles that were usually not visible. Chapter 8:15. Nanhing took a look at the time and saw that it was already past 10 o'clock at night. He was about to walk back to the sofa when he paused and looked back at Feng Ling, who looked like she couldn't control her weight and muscles. You can't sleep. Shall I accompany you out to gain weight? Feng Ling was startled. How do I gain weight? Before I came here, I saw that there is a food street near the hospital. There are all kinds of American and Chinese snacks. Do you want to try it? The moment Feng Ling heard this, she stood up, grabbed her coat and put it on. Anyway, it was summer and the night was not cold. She then put on the pair of flip-flops that Xiao Su had bought for her, grabbed her phone, and followed the man out. 11 Base was outside the suburbs of Los Angeles. Although the environment of the base was very good, it was far from the city. Usually, people didn't have the chance to stroll on such a small street. Although Feng Ling was not very interested in these things, since she couldn't sleep, it was better to go out for a walk than to lie in the hospital like this. The doctor had also said that she only needed to receive treatment, an aerosol inhalation, at a fixed time every day. No surgery, no injections, and only needed to stay in the ward when the doctor came to check up on her. The rest of the time, she was free to move around. Besides, she wasn't that delicate. She could go on a mission at any time with such a small problem, let alone going out for a stroll or a midnight snack. Li Nanheng had walked to the door and was standing outside looking at her. Feng Ling walked over quickly, looking not sleepy at all. Boss, can I just put on my coat and go out? I won't change the hospital gown inside. It's too troublesome to change it. He looked at the loose clothes she was wearing and squeezed out a flat voice from his throat. Anne. The two of them walked out. In order to avoid the sight of the nurse on duty, Feng Ling deliberately turned to a public bathroom. When the nurse turned to go to the office to get something, she quickly walked in the direction of the elevator. After entering the elevator, Li Nanheng glanced at Feng Ling standing by the side. What do you want to eat? Hearing this, Feng Ling suddenly smiled, stood closer to him, and said in a relaxed and cheerful mood, Didn't you say that there are local American snacks and Chinese snacks? I haven't eaten any snacks before. Let's go take a look first. Who knew that she had lived for more than 10 years, but had never eaten those snacks? It was rare for her to experience it once, so she was probably a little excited. However, Feng Ling was not good at showing such excitement, so her eyes seemed to be blooming with some kind of brilliance and were bright. Nanheng looked at her for a while and didn't say anything, but the corners of his mouth curved into a smile that even he didn't notice. When the elevator reached the first floor, the man walked forward and Feng Ling rushed to follow him. Perhaps she was too excited and overjoyed. When she stepped out of the elevator, she didn't pay much attention to her feet and accidentally stepped in the middle of the marble floor outside the elevator. The tip of her foot was stuck there, and her left foot suddenly flew out. She stumbled and with a dong sound, she bumped into Li Nanheng in front of her. Her nose hit the man's firm and broad back harshly. Nanheng didn't expect the situation behind him, and was almost knocked down a marble staircase in front of the elevator. Fortunately, he held onto the railing of the staircase and steadied himself. Feng Ling raised her head with lingering fear, only to see Li Nanheng's expressionless face. The man narrowed his eyes. You're so reckless. I'm not in front of you. Do you want to fall down? Feng Ling could still feel the warmth of the man's back, and her heart was thumping nonstop. Hearing this, She coughed and bent down to pick up the slippers that had just flown out. I didn't do it on purpose. As she put on her shoes, she glanced at the marble staircase in front of her. This largest hospital in Los Angeles was very luxurious. A part of the first floor had been dug down to build a particularly large main entrance hall of the hospital. From here, it took about 4 or 5 steps to reach the bottom. Thinking of the scene, that if Li Nanheng lost his balance and rolled down the stairs, Feng Ling couldn't help laughing. She didn't know that Boss Li was looking down at her at this moment, and didn't notice that the hospital gown she was wearing was so loose that the man could see her collarbone clearly. The boy's collar was loose. As she squatted like this, the man could see the view of her collarbone. Li Nanheng's eyes abruptly darkened. His Adam's apple moved and his heart skipped a beat. Damn it. This boy's collarbone was so beautiful. He should be a woman. Was he born with the wrong gender? Why did he have to be a man? The snack street Li Nanheng mentioned was indeed behind the parking lot downstairs of the hospital. It was a very long street. On both sides were various small shops selling all kinds of things. At night, various stalls would come out and occupy both sides of the street. Over the years, it had gradually become a standard snack street, which was equivalent to a particularly prosperous night market in China. From the main entrance of the hospital, they walked to the parking lot on the ground and passed through the alley behind. In total, it took about 10 minutes to arrive. In these 10 minutes, Li Nanheng walked in front. The man's side profile was cold and calm, elegant and aloof. When they arrived at the snack street, the man's every breath and every step, in a unique way, signaled to strangers to stay away. Feng Ling followed by the man's side as they walked down the bustling street. It was as though all of her life experiences since she was young, and the life that was so peaceful that other than eating and living, there was finally a hint of dust in her life at this moment. It was as though this was the life that a person should come into contact with and enjoy in this world. Busyness and enjoyment, eating and drinking happily in this chaotic world were not as simple as eating and wearing warm clothes. Everyone here seemed to be very interesting. When Feng Ling was young, she was raised by a pack of wolves. When she grew up, she didn't have any thoughts. Now, standing in such a crowded place, seeing all kinds of lights and people, she suddenly thought of her parents for the first time in her life. Who exactly were her parents? What kind of people were they? Why was she separated from her parents? Was she an abandoned child? Or did something happen? In such an interesting world, why did she not even know where her roots were? In order to dispel the sudden doubts in her heart, she took the initiative to say, "It's so lively here. Boss, what do you want to eat?" "Anything." How was she supposed to respond? Kay said that the Chinese barbecue is very delicious. Is that a barbecue stall? Let's go eat barbecue. Anything. Oh, dash. Chapter 8:16. At this moment, Li Nanheng fully displayed his instinct to be concise and comprehensive. If he could say 2 words, he definitely wouldn't say a third word. He was clearly the one who suggested eating out, but he said it was fine. How could Feng Ling, who had never eaten these things, respond? She didn't even know how to choose. Feng Ling tilted her head and touched his calm face. The two of them walked side by side for a while. The man didn't say a word. He only occasionally looked at the various stalls by the roadside and didn't say much. He invited someone out to shop on the food street and then left her to fend for herself? Was this the so-called straight man who didn't know how to be romantic and coax people? If she had known this, Feng Ling wouldn't have come down from the hospital in the middle of the night to shop on some food street. But Boss Li took the initiative to suggest it. How could she refuse? Feng Ling tried hard to find a topic. "Boss, do you usually come to the hospital to visit every member of the base after they are injured?" "Yes." "Then do you also stay in the same ward as the injured members?" Li Nanheng glanced at her. "Just say what you want to say. There's no need to beat around the bush." "Feng Ling." He saw through her so easily. Nanheng glanced at her face and added indifferently, "After all, I'm the person in charge of the base and the captain of all the training teams. Except for missions and training, I don't have much contact with the members. If I don't show up to visit and show how much the base values every member when they're injured, it would be too much." His words made it seem that even visiting her in the hospital was just doing his duty, and he didn't have the slightest intention of caring for her. He was clearly a person who was cold on the outside but warm on the inside, but he insisted on making himself sound so unapproachable and heartless. Feng Ling's soft, short hair fluttered in the night wind. She fidgeted with the stray hair by her ear, and suddenly seemed to recall something. She turned to ask him, "Boss, is there a barber shop nearby?" Li Nanheng paused and looked at her. "Why are you looking for a barber shop?" "Cut my hair. I feel that my hair still looks a little longer. It's perfect to cut it to K's and Tam's short length." She pointed at her soft, short hair sticking to her forehead. "The barber in the base always says that my hair is very good, and that it's a pity to shave it short. He stubbornly insists that I keep this hairstyle. It's rare for me to come out. If there's a barber outside, I'll shave it short. That way, I'll probably look a little healthier than before." "This guy wants to shave his head." Li Nanheng glanced at her calmly. Although the young man's hair was short, he at least looked refined and gentle, making people feel that he was exceptionally soft. He tried to imagine what Feng Ling's hairstyle would look like if it was shorter. He had to admit that even if Feng Ling had a shorter hairstyle, she would still look good. However, he had gotten used to looking at her this way. If she suddenly changed her hairstyle, he wouldn't feel right. Li Nanheng couldn't tell what he was feeling, but he really didn't want her hair to be too short. Besides, this length was also very normal. If her loose and soft hair was rubbed on this guy's head, it would feel very comfortable. If it was short, if he rubbed it, it would probably hurt. When Feng Ling first arrived at the base at the age of 13, her hair was very short. Later, it was the barber in the base who trimmed her hairstyle, and she had maintained it for a long time. Li Nanheng couldn't tell what he was thinking at this moment. He quickly glanced at a small barber shop not far away and said indifferently, "There's no one nearby." Feng Ling paused. "Then boss, where do you usually go to get your hair cut? Is it all done by the barber in the base? There are so many men in the base. Why would it be so troublesome? Buy a hairdresser and do it yourself." He coldly opened his eyes and lied. Feng Ling looked at his short but handsome hairstyle suspiciously. "Boss, did you come up with this hairstyle yourself?" Li Nanheng was too lazy to answer. When they passed by the barber shop in front, he deliberately took her across the long street from the other side of the crowd, and didn't approach the barber shop. He didn't answer, and Feng Ling didn't insist on asking. She thought that Kay's hairstyle was indeed similar to that of the other brothers in the base. It turned out that they all did it themselves. No wonder they were not creative, and only had short or squarish hair. However, after looking at it for a long time, she felt that it was very neat, and the squarish hairstyle was really a test of appearance. It turned out that this group of people in the base were all good-looking. After passing by the barber shop, and making sure that Feng Ling wouldn't see him, Nanheng continued to walk forward silently. Feng Ling was not stupid. After walking for a while, she felt that something was wrong, and looked back at the crowd behind her. "Why did we pass by the barbecue stall over there? Boss, don't you want to try it?" "Li Nanheng, Chinese barbecue tastes terrible. I'm not interested. If you want to eat it, eat something else. Forget about the barbecue." "Is the barbecue very bad?" "But I heard that it's very delicious, especially, very bad." Feng Ling. For some reason, she felt that boss's words seemed to be against his conscience. She didn't suspect anything else. She thought that maybe boss just didn't like barbecue. Although they came to the food street, Li Nanheng still didn't allow Feng Ling to eat at the roadside stalls, especially those that emitted smoke. He took her around. Feng Ling knew that it was because she still needed to aerosol to clear her lungs, and she couldn't smell these smoky things. A noodle shop was in front of them, and it was a large chain brand from China. Li Nanheng said, "There isn't much training and activity during the recovery period. It's not easy to digest lying in the hospital, so we can eat some easy-to-digest noodles." With that, the man took the lead and walked in. After a few steps, he remembered that Feng Ling seemed to like eating noodles in the base cafeteria. So he simply turned back and held her wrist to pull her in. The boy's wrist was incredibly slender. It was clearly a hand that had the strength to hold a spear, but it was so thin. Nanhing resisted the urge to grab her sleeve to see how thin she was under it. He didn't say much, and directly brought Feng Ling to a quiet seat inside. Because there were a lot of people in the restaurant, and it was always full, it was difficult to find a seat. However, they were lucky. As soon as they got up, a seat in the corner near the back window happened to be empty after someone finished eating. They went over and sat down. Chapter 8:17. It's all unclean and unnutritious junk food outside. Don't eat those now. Just sit here and eat a bowl of noodles. The man's face was still expressionless. Feng Ling. But boss, this is my first time shopping on the food street. It smells quite good. Seeing the boy's somewhat regretful expression, it seemed that since Feng Ling appeared in the base, this was the first time she saw this usually calm boy had such an expression of longing for something. When your body is better, I'll bring you here again if you want to eat. Bear with it for the next few days. Feng Ling's gaze fell on the wine list on the table, which was clearly marked in both Chinese and English. After asking for a bottle of mineral water, she raised her eyes to look at him. Can I come again in the future? If the base is not busy, I can bring you here again on the weekends during the afternoon break. With that, Nanhing ignored her and directly ordered 2 bowls of the best beef noodle in this chain restaurant from the waiter, who came over. Seeing that the boss clearly said that he wanted to come out to eat, but in the end, his attitude seemed to be, I don't want to be very warm to you. Feng Ling didn't say much while waiting for the noodles. When the waiter brought up the noodles, Feng Ling thanked him, and at the same time turned to ask politely, May I ask if there's a barber shop nearby? Li Nanheng had just picked up a magazine from the magazine rack by the table when his hand paused. He turned his eyes and looked at the waitress standing by the side with a somewhat dangerous look. The waitress saw such a handsome and fair-skinned little boy was politely asking her, and for a moment, she didn't notice the look in the eyes of the tall and handsome man opposite her. She directly answered, There's a barber shop behind the hottest barbecue stall 300 meters away. Behind the barbecue stall? The barbecue place that they just passed by? Feng Ling paused and abruptly turned to look at Li Nanheng. Seeing that she had nothing to do, the waitress smiled again and turned to leave. Li Nanheng was expressionless and did not explain. He directly spat out 3 words. Don't cut it. Feng Ling, why? He still remained expressionless. No reason. I'm your boss. This is an order. Boss, you still care whether I cut my hair or not. There are too many crew cuts in the base. I'm tired of looking at them. Your hairstyle isn't bad. With that, Li Nanheng casually asked a waitress passing by. Isn't his hairstyle good? The waitress was confused by the question, but when she took a closer look at the handsome young man in front of him, she smiled sincerely and said, Yes, very handsome and good-looking, like he walked out of a manga. Feng Ling could only smile at such an evaluation. When she raised her eyes again, she saw that Li Nanheng had raised his eyebrows. Although he did not smile, it was clear that there was a hint of pride hidden under his cold expression. If he didn't want to cut it, so be it. Feng Ling picked up the chopsticks and ate the noodles. During the meal, no one spoke. Boss Li's temper was hard to understand, and Feng Ling couldn't say much. Usually, Feng Ling was a person of few words. When boss didn't speak, she was especially quiet. After eating noodles, the two went to a supermarket in front of the snack street. Feng Ling had to stay in the hospital for a week. Although the hospital had everything, she didn't bring her daily necessities from the base. She didn't have any relatives who could help her buy daily necessities. Since she was out, she might as well buy some back. Anyway, after using them, she could directly take them back to the base, so it wouldn't be a waste. When they arrived at the supermarket, Feng Ling looked at a lot of things, including shampoo, shower gel, toothpaste, toothbrush, towels and sunscreen that could be used in the base, as well as some other daily necessities. However, she did not pick things fast, and even very slowly. She habitually looked at the price, compared it with the price of similar products, and calculated which was the most cost-effective. Finally, she picked up the bottles and cans and put them into the shopping cart. Li Nanheng looked at her by the side. After a long time, he asked indifferently, The bonus that the base usually gives you is not enough? Even if a part of it is with me, it will not be less than 10,000 yuan a month. Do you not have enough money? Feng Ling chose a toothpaste and put it into the shopping cart. It's enough. Since it's enough, why are you so frugal? Feng Ling paused and raised her head to look at him. I'm used to it. Before entering the base, I didn't spend much money. After entering the base, there isn't much that I need to spend money on. It's rare that I come out to buy things. I want to feel the pleasure of buying and choosing things. Li Nanheng. In fact, when Feng Ling was a child, she was often hungry. Some people could describe her as poor, but she was not poor. When she was a child, she had no concept of money or life. She just wanted to eat and live like an animal's instinct. Later, she gradually understood the importance of money, but she would not waste every penny. Otherwise, she would only feel unsettled. Watching her choose and compare, Li Nanheng felt annoyed. The reason for his annoyance was not because he was impatient to wait here. Instead, he could see how bad Feng Ling's life was. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so careful. When she thought about how this young man had once passed by the window of a certain restaurant and was almost chased out just because he wanted to go in for a bite of someone else's leftovers, it wasn't hard to imagine the worst days when she had to starve. There were many members in 11 base with poor family conditions, but no matter how poor they were, at least they had someone to rely on. However, most of them were from wealthy families and only chose to enter 11 base to train. But Feng Ling was clearly different. Do you still want to eat barbecue? The man suddenly asked in a low voice. Feng Ling, who was picking a toothbrush cup, paused and looked up at the man. It seemed that she could see the indescribable emotions in the man's eyes. It seemed that he had a particularly uncomfortable feeling of guilt for not being able to satisfy what she wanted to eat just now. However, this emotion was not obvious. Feng Ling only saw it briefly, and the man's expression turned coldly in another direction to look at the other shelves behind her. Feng Ling held the toothbrush cup and smiled. Boss, I'm already full. Even if you want me to eat now, I can't eat anymore. Besides, it's already very late. I have to go back to the ward to lie down. Aren't you afraid that my digestive system will have problems? Then come out to eat tomorrow night. Chapter 8:18. Feng Ling smiled. Although her smile was not very obvious. For Feng Ling, who was usually cold and expressionless, this slight movement of her eyebrows was already a very understanding smile. All right, then I'll wait for boss to treat me, Feng Ling said as she put the things she had just picked into the shopping cart. When she went to the cashier to pay the bill, Li Nanheng suddenly asked her to take 2 bottles of mineral water from the freezer next to him. Feng Ling turned to take 2 bottles and was about to pay the bill when she saw the man casually took out a black card and handed it to the cashier. When she saw it was a black card, the cashier was surprised. A black card was not something that ordinary people could have. They were either especially rich or especially powerful. But why would such a rich person go shopping in the supermarket himself? And looking at the pile of things in the shopping cart, the price was very high, cheap, and easy to use. It didn't seem like people with a black card would buy it at all. But the cashier didn't dare to say a word. When she looked up at the tall man in front of her, she subconsciously took the card and swiped it. Feng Ling took the water and was about to speak, but the cashier had already swiped the card and then respectfully and cautiously handed the black card back to the tall man. Boss, although these things are not expensive, they add up to 200 or 300 yuan. I can buy them myself. Feng Ling approached and said, pay for the 2 bottles of water in your hand. The man just glanced at her, put the things in the shopping cart into 2 shopping bags, and turned to carry them away. Feng Ling looked at the water in her hand, which added up to less than 5 yuan. It was already late when she returned to the hospital. Feng Ling once again avoided the nurse on duty and returned to the ward. On the contrary, Li Nanheng, who came to visit the patient, swaggered in with 2 bags of things. The nurse on duty looked at the things in his hand in confusion. First, she didn't know when this family member went out, and second, why did he buy so many things? Was he going to stay in the hospital for a long time? Of course, the nurse didn't dare to ask. When Li Nanheng came out of the elevator with the things in his hand, she gave him an admiring look, suppressed the doubt in her eyes, and watched the man's back all the way back to the ward. After returning to the ward, Feng Ling took off her coat, drank some water, and sat back on the bed. After returning to the ward, Li Nanheng helped her place the things she bought one by one in the simple small bathroom in the ward. She didn't expect Boss Li to be so considerate. Feng Ling looked at the man's figure in the bathroom and curved her lips slightly. Her eyes revealed a smile that she did not even notice. 3 days later, Boss Li stayed in the hospital for one night. The next morning before dawn, he was called back by a call from the base. Xiao Su still stayed in the hospital, but under normal circumstances, he was only responsible for preparing breakfast, lunch, and dinner for Feng Ling, or buying some medicine for her to use during the atomization. For the rest of the time, Feng Ling was in a relatively quiet state. This was also the first time she had spent such a peaceful and idle life in the base in the past few years. In the endless training life, this feeling wasn't exactly good, but it wasn't bad either. It was true that she was leisurely and comfortable, but it was also true that she was bored. She asked Xiao Su to only stay in the hospital for 3 days before returning to the base. Xiao Su couldn't persuade her and had to call Boss Li. However, Boss Li did not agree and warned her that she must stay in the hospital for a week according to the doctor's arrangement. After a week, she could go back after confirming that there was no problem. Otherwise, the gate of the base would never allow her to enter. The gate of the base would not be open for her, so she really couldn't go back. On the 4th day of Feng Ling's stay in the hospital, Xiao Su had to go out temporarily because of some private matters, and would probably not be back until tomorrow. Feng Ling had just finished the atomization in the ward, returned the atomization equipment to the nurse, and was about to turn back to the ward when she suddenly heard a slightly familiar voice. "Aunt, don't always be angry with my cousin. Look at you, your heart has been uncomfortable for a long time. If she is stubborn, then so be it. Why are you angry? Isn't it obvious that you have a problem with your own body? There is nothing wrong with cousin Mingzhu liking a man. Besides, didn't we see Mr. Li the other day? I think he is really a good person, although he is a little cold and not easy to be close to. The colder a person is, the more serious he is, and the less annoying he is. And that Mr. Li is really handsome. You see, I grew up in the United States. What kind of big and tough man haven't I seen? But Mr. Li is not the kind of person who looks particularly big and muscular. But at a glance, I can tell that he is absolutely the type of person who is absolutely superb in both body and martial arts, and is particularly masculine. I feel that he has a particularly eye-catching aura. I don't know what it is, but anyway, as long as it is a girl, she should be tempted by him, let alone my cousin. Since she was a child, she has always thought that she would marry him, but in the end, she was rejected. And he even used my poor little cousin as an excuse, which made her more and more stubborn. In fact, I understand her feelings very well." Mrs. Feng's voice then came. "Tempted? Are you also tempted by that Li Nanheng?" Qin Shuk took Qin Xiu's arm and said with a smile, "Mr. Li is indeed very handsome, but after all, he is the person cousin Mingzhu likes. A rabbit doesn't eat the grass near its nest. No matter how handsome he is, he can't be tempted by his cousin's fiancée. If I really want to be tempted, I think that young man who is about the same age as me that day is more suitable for me." Qin Xiu smiled and rolled her eyes at her. "What fiancé? The Li family has already cancelled this engagement. He is no longer a fiancé. He would rather nominally marry your poor little cousin, who died early, than marry your cousin Mingzhu. This matter is indeed a bit too much, but the Feng family has to unite with the Li family through marriage. Alas, I don't know what to do." Feng Ling didn't understand what they were talking about, and didn't think about avoiding them. As a result, she suddenly met them in the corridor of this ward area. Qin Shuk was the first to see Feng Ling. When she saw Feng Ling, who was wearing a light blue hospital gown, and his fair androgynous face was unbelievably handsome, she stared at Feng Ling's face in disbelief and said in surprise, "Just now, I said that I couldn't get his phone number, but I met him again." "What?" Qin Xiu didn't understand what she meant. She only saw her little niece's excited expression, and suddenly turned to see Feng Ling standing there with a dumbfounded expression. Dash. Chapter 819. The moment she saw Feng Ling again, Qin Xiu was in a trance. The first time she saw him, she didn't have such a strong feeling, probably because her mother was by her side at that time. She had been worried about her mother's emotions, but this time, when she saw this young man, the inexplicable feeling of wanting to be close to him was particularly obvious. Qin Xiu grabbed her bag excitedly, raised her hand, and greeted Feng Ling with a smile. Hi. Feng Ling was startled. Although she didn't feel particularly familiar with him, she still nodded instinctively, but there was no smile on her face. She was not good at interacting with strangers, let alone smiling at strangers, especially when there were no other acquaintances around her. So she instinctively covered herself with a layer of protective shield. Little fresh meat, why are you in the hospital? Qin Xiu asked, glanced at the hospital gown Feng Ling was wearing, and immediately asked in surprise, What's wrong with you? Are you sick? Feng Ling glanced at Mrs. Feng, and then turned to Qin Xiu. Nothing. There was a small accident. I need to stay in the hospital for a few days. I'm about to be discharged. With that, she paused and looked at Mrs. Feng, who seemed to have something in her eyes. Mrs. Feng, is your heart not feeling well? Yes, you heard our conversation just now, right? Mrs. Feng looked at her with a smile. Feng Ling nodded and still stood in place. Mrs. Feng took Qin Xiu by her side and walked over to her. When she came closer, she could see Feng Ling's face more clearly. The young man in front of him was still fair and clean, but he wasn't wearing the cold black combat suit today. Instead, he was wearing a light blue patient's gown. It was as if the cold and indifferent young man had softened, making him look very approachable. Of course, if this young man's expression wasn't so cold and calm, people would want to get close to him. My heart has been uncomfortable for more than 10 years. I'll be fine with some medicine in the hospital. With that, Mrs. Feng looked at the nearby doors. Are you staying in this ward? Which one are you staying in? Feng Ling looked at her and did not speak. Mrs. Feng saw her guarded heart and said gently, We are old friends with Mr. Li. You are a member of 11 Base and have helped us. Since you are staying in the hospital, and we met here, it can be considered a rare fate. It's okay if it's not convenient. But what do you usually like to eat? Do you like chicken soup? I'll make some myself tomorrow, and put it in a thermos cup, and have Shik send it to you. No need, Madame Feng is too polite. There's no need to be polite. This is what I should do. Madame Feng's gaze was gentle as she watched Feng Ling's face. Perhaps I really do have some fate with you. Every time I meet you, I feel an indescribable sense of closeness in my heart. You may not believe it, but you bear some resemblance to me when I was young. Feng Ling completely treated Madame Feng's words as mere courtesy. She only curved her lips slightly, but the smile did not reach her eyes. She did not take it to heart. Qin Xiu looked at Feng Ling's face and remembered that her mother often talked about this boy these days. There was an indescribable feeling in her heart. It was very warm. You don't have to be too polite to my aunt. You don't have to be too polite to my aunt. My aunt is very kind to everyone. You see, I'm just her niece, but I've been spoiled by her since I was a child. She treats others the same way. Since you've helped my grandma and aunt, they will definitely remember your kindness. Since you're in the hospital, if you don't have any relatives around you, I'll bring you chicken soup. Although my aunt is the madam of the Feng family, she can make good soup. It's very delicious. Feng Ling looked at Madame Feng, and Madame Feng was also looking at her. As she looked at her, her eyes seemed to be filled with emotion. Feng Ling had to withdraw her gaze. Considering that it was not good to stand in the corridor like this, she pointed to the ward not far away. If Madame Feng is not feeling well, then come to my ward. There is a sofa inside. You can rest. Okay. Qin Xiu immediately agreed. Qin Xiu had never seen her aunt talk so happily with an outsider. Looking at Feng Ling's beautiful face, her heart surged with all kinds of joy, and she followed them in with a smile. After entering the ward, Feng Ling glanced at the sofa and saw that it was very clean and there was nothing piled up, so she simply returned to the bedside. When she looked back, she saw that they had come in. She really didn't know how to get along with strangers, so she could only choose to turn around to pick up disposable paper cups, pour 2 cups of warm water, and put them on the small table next to the coffee table. The sunlight shone in from the window and fell on Feng Ling's face, making the boy's face look extremely soft. From this angle, Madame Feng seemed to vaguely see the boy's collarbone exposed by the collar of the hospital gown, which was so slender that it seemed to be the bones of a boy. Young people may not be particularly clear, but Qin Xiu's uncle used to be a very famous orthopedic doctor in the United States. When she was very young, she heard from her uncle that men and women, no matter their age, had different bone thickness and some details. This boy's collarbone. Madame Feng's eyes fell on the boy's hand again. It was also slender and white, many times better than a man's hand, but because of long-term training and holding a gun, no matter how white and tender it was, there would be a thin layer of callus on the palm, but it was not very obvious. When she continued to look carefully, Feng Ling had turned to the other side to pick up her cell phone. Looking at this boy who was also much thinner than other men of the same age, Qin Xiu wanted to take a closer look, but at this time, a nurse came in to deliver medicine, interrupting the doubts in her mind. "Aunt, let's go sit over there." Qin Shuk helped her to the sofa, then turned to see that the nurse had turned to go out after delivering the medicine. When the ward was quiet again, she took small steps to come up to Feng Ling. Feng Ling turned around and suddenly saw Qin Shuk approaching, and her eyes froze. Looking at the girl who was only about 3 centimeters shorter than her, she didn't quite understand what was going on with her enthusiastic expression. "Miss Qin, I clearly got your cell phone number last time, but you snatched it and deleted it," Qin Shuk said regretfully. "Is your 11 base really so strict? You can't even tell your cell phone number to outsiders?" Chapter 820. Qin Shuk said with a look of pity, "I see. Can't we do it secretly?" Feng Ling's expression remained the same. "The rules of the base are obeyed. Nothing can be done secretly." Seeing such a serious expression, Qin Shuk immediately pulled a long face and said, "It seems that I should ask cousin Mingzhu to pursue Li Nanheng as soon as possible. When he becomes my cousin-in-law, it will be much easier for me to get familiar with the people in the base. Now I can't even ask for your number. How can it be so strict? It's really too strict." Feng Ling's eyes remained unchanged, but she looked at her steadily. "Who is cousin Mingzhu? What do you mean by cousin-in-law?" It was rare to see this little fresh meat who was indifferent to everything in front of her seem to be interested in something. So Qin Shuk directly answered, "Cousin Mingzhu is my aunt's daughter. Your boss Li Nanheng is my cousin's fiancé, and will marry my cousin in the future. So I said he will be my future cousin-in-law." Feng Ling glanced at her again. "Is that so?" "Yes. Don't you know that your boss Li had an engagement with the Feng family when he was very young?" "Oh yes, your base is usually so strict. I don't think he will casually say this kind of private thing. But he will definitely marry my cousin in the future." Madame Feng listened behind. She should explain that Li Nanheng had cancelled the engagement with her eldest daughter, Mingzhu, but seeing that Feng Ling seemed to have a rare interaction with Qin Shuk, and Shuk seemed to like him very much, she simply didn't interrupt. Feng Ling's eyes paused on Qin Shuk for a moment. She didn't know what kind of strange emotion suddenly sank in her heart, but she instinctively wanted to confirm whether her words were true or false. After looking at her for a moment, when Qin Shuk blinked at her with a smile, Feng Ling expressionlessly looked away and returned to the bed to sit down. Seeing that Feng Ling's complexion looked normal except for a little pale, and seeing that Feng Ling's pace when returning to the ward was very steady, Qin Shuk simply pulled the chair by the bed to sit down, and reached out to pick up the phone by the bed. "Miss Qin, have you forgotten what I just said?" Feng Ling reminded her. Qin Shuk did want to use Feng Ling's phone to call her again, so that she could remember the number. But seeing Feng Ling's serious expression, she could only put the phone back. "Then I don't want your cell phone number. Can you tell me your name?" Qin Shuk's eyes were shining. Anyway, she refused to do it so easily. Feng Ling was a little helpless. After Boss Li's advice last time, she also knew that this little girl named Qin Shuk must have fallen in love with someone else. Not to mention that Feng Ling didn't have any plans to fall in love with anyone at all. Besides, how could two women fall in love? Don't be so silent all the time. Seeing that she intended to continue to hide her identity, Qin Shuk hurriedly reached out to grab Feng Ling's hand. But Feng Ling reacted quickly and instantly moved her hand away. In the end, Qin Shuk could only catch a corner of her sleeve. This scene made Mrs. Feng Qin Xiu, who was sitting on the sofa, feel a little pitiful. Qin Xiu sighed softly. Shuk, it's not the first time you've seen this little brother. He seems to be so introverted. He can't stand the pestering of a crazy girl like you. Come here obediently. Don't pester him. Qin Shuk sat there unwillingly. She grabbed Feng Ling's sleeve and looked up at the beautiful and calm young man sitting on the bed. She whispered pleadingly, "Then tell me your name. I definitely won't pester you. Otherwise I'll be curious to death." Probably seeing Feng Ling's scruples, Mrs. Feng got up and came over. She was about to speak when out of the corner of her eye, she suddenly caught a glimpse of the patient number and medical records at the end of the bed. When she glanced at Feng Ling's name, she was stunned and her eyes fell on Feng Ling's face again. "Your surname is Feng?" Qin Xiu stared at her face firmly. Because of Mrs. Qin's gaze, Feng Ling turned to look at her and glanced at the medical records at the end of the bed. Since this was the case, there was nothing to hide, so she said lightly, "Yes, it's a coincidence. My surname is also Feng." Qin Xiu's eyes trembled, and then she looked at her name again. When she saw the line Feng Ling and the surname male age 16, the excitement in her eyes faded a little. Feng Ling. Which Ling? Ling as in Ling. Feng Ling. Qin Xiu looked at her face. At this moment, because Feng Ling was sitting upright by the bed, her collar was closed, and her collarbone and skin under the collar could not be seen. However, Qin Xiu had a vague feeling that a very, very strong feeling. In the United States, especially in Los Angeles, there are not many Chinese surnamed Feng. There are only a few families who often have contact with our Feng family. But why don't I know you, Mrs. Feng? I am an orphan. My name was just temporarily given to me by the person who adopted me, so I'm not sure what my surname should be, Feng Ling explained simply. This kind of coincidence can only be regarded as a coincidence. I don't even know who my parents are, let alone what their surnames are. Qin Xiu's words were interrupted by Feng Ling's cold words. Her expression froze and her eyes couldn't help but dim. I see. Feng Ling? Qin Shuk blinked. Feng Ling, right? What a nice name. It sounds cold and cool. It matches your temperament very well. Feng Ling. Because of this name, Qin Xiu found an opportunity to chat with Feng Ling for a while, but she couldn't get any information from Feng Ling. Qin Shuk always interjected, and the topic was intermittent. In the end, they talked about why Feng Ling was hospitalized. When she learned that Feng Ling was accidentally injured when on a mission in 11 Base, she didn't ask more. After all, she knew that the matters of 11 Base were confidential, and she really shouldn't keep embarrassing this little boy. Qin Xiu asked Qin Shuk to go downstairs to buy some fruit. Qin Shuk got up and was about to go out to buy it. Even if Feng Ling tried to stop her, she couldn't persuade them. Chapter 821. Feng Ling didn't understand what Mrs. Feng meant, so she just raised her head and looked at her seriously. What do you want to ask, Mrs. Feng? Are you really a boy? Madame Feng probably felt that her question was too abrupt and disrespectful to him. When she spoke, her expression was apologetic and tactful. Don't think too much. It's only because your child is too beautiful that I... Feng Ling's expression remained unchanged and her eyes were calm. You don't have to be sorry. I'm often misunderstood in the base, probably because I'm much thinner and smaller than my peers. It's normal for me to be misunderstood in this regard. Mrs. Feng froze. So you mean? I'm a man. Feng Ling answered without hesitation. Mrs. Feng looked at her and couldn't say anything, but she felt a little unwilling, so she could only look at her. You. Mrs. Feng, just now Miss Qin said that your heart is not feeling well. As you can see in my ward, I really don't have anything to entertain you. When Miss Qin comes back, let her send you home to rest. I'm still recovering and need to rest. Feng Ling didn't intend to say too much and directly asked her to leave. Qin Xiu had lived for so long, How could she not see the indifference, alienation, and vigilance in this boy's nature? And how could she not hear the meaning of expulsion in her words? She just instinctively felt that maybe her question was too abrupt, so she could only smile at Feng Ling apologetically. Sorry. Feng Ling just looked at her indifferently, neither smiling nor annoyed. Say hello to Granny for me. The mountain is high and the road is long. We just pass by each other. I don't think we'll meet again in the future. In fact, my mother likes you very much. If you want, you can visit her often. My mother doesn't have any children at home. And you say you are an orphan. Maybe she can recognize you as Mrs. Feng. Thank you for your kindness, but I'm used to being alone. Feng Ling interrupted her again. Qin Xiu didn't know what to say, so she shut her mouth awkwardly and sat on the sofa waiting for Qin Shuk to come back. During this period, Feng Ling received a call from the base. Tam asked her if she lacked anything in the hospital. After the afternoon training, he could buy it for her and send it over. Feng Ling did not say anything and simply chatted about the base for a few days before hanging up. During this period, neither of them spoke much. When their eyes met, Mrs. Qin smiled at her lightly. Feng Ling still looked at her calmly and then retracted her gaze. She picked up the base manual that Xiao Su had given her a few days ago and sat on the bed to casually flip through it to kill time. Qin Shuk didn't know where she went to buy fruit. She went out for more than 20 minutes, but still didn't come back. Qin Xiu had just taken the sedative medicine prescribed by the doctor in the consultation room. After sitting on the sofa for a while, she supported her head with one hand and closed her eyes to take a nap. Unknowingly, she leaned against the sofa and fell asleep. In her dream, the endless dark sea mercilessly swallowed the crying baby girl in the swaddling clothes. In an instant, the child disappeared from the sea, and the rolling waves roared wildly like a beast. No matter how she stood on the wet deck and cried wildly, the child still disappeared in the huge waves of the sea. Feng Ling didn't like people who made her feel strange in her place. This would make her very uncomfortable. She had been used to being alone since she was a child, so she endured it for a long time. Even though she knew that Mrs. Feng didn't mean any harm, and was just waiting for Qin Shuk to come back, she still turned to look at Mrs. Qin, who was sleeping on the sofa, and suddenly had a forehead full of sweat. Feng Ling didn't know if Mrs. Qin was feeling unwell or something. After reading for a while, she put down the manual in her hand, lifted the quilt on the sickbed, and got out of bed. When she walked over, she saw that Mrs. Feng had been tightly holding the old scarf on her shoulder when she fell asleep. Looking at the scarf, Feng Ling inexplicably wanted to touch it, but her reason made her restrain her hand and gently placed her hand on Mrs. Feng's forehead. My child. Mrs. Feng suddenly opened her eyes the moment Feng Ling's hand touched her. Her eyes were so frightened that they seemed to have lost focus. However, she stared at a certain point in the room for a long time, until her eyes slowly regained focus. When she saw the person standing in front of her, she looked at Feng Ling's face in a trance. Mrs. Feng, did you have a nightmare? Feng Ling asked indifferently, and moved her hand away from her forehead. Qin Xiu looked at her for a while before she seemed to return to herself, and her expression gradually calmed down. Yes, I had a nightmare. I've had this nightmare over and over again all these years. I didn't expect that I would fall asleep sitting here. Did I forget myself just now? No. After speaking, Feng Ling glanced at the scarf on her shoulder. Although it's a bit cold in this season, the wind hasn't picked up yet. Madame Feng has been wearing a scarf indoors. Don't you feel too hot? What she wanted to say was that she saw Mrs. Feng wearing this scarf the last time she met her. And this time, she saw it again, and this scarf was very old, but it was really inappropriate and impolite to say this, so Feng Ling didn't say it. Qin Xiu smiled and touched the scarf on her shoulder. This scarf was my second daughter's favorite when she was a child. The wind was very strong in the autumn when she was born. Every time I took her out, I would gently cover her face with this scarf to prevent the sand from blowing into her eyes. Later, I found that every time she cried, as long as I put this scarf on her face, she would smile, and then... Qin Xiu paused, omitted those past events and said with a smile, later, I got used to keeping this scarf on me all the time. In fact, this scarf used to be red, but now after so many years, it has been washed too many times, and the color has turned yellow. Do you think this scarf is very old and ugly? No, everyone has a thing that carries a story. This scarf has been with you for so many years. It can be seen that Mrs. Feng must love your second daughter very much. After speaking, Feng Ling did not say more. After confirming that she was fine, she turned and was about to return to the bed. Feng Ling, Mrs. Feng suddenly called her. Feng Ling turned back to look at her. The moment their eyes met, Madame Feng could not help but pinch the scarf around her shoulders. She looked at her with deep emotion. It's all right. Earlier, I suddenly had something to ask you, but I suddenly forgot. Feng Ling looked at her in confusion. It was not until the door of the ward suddenly opened that she withdrew her gaze and turned to the other side. Chapter 822. When the door of the ward opened, the first person to walk in was a beautiful woman, whom Feng Ling found unfamiliar. She glanced at the person who came in, and then saw Qin Shik who followed her in. Aunt, I just met cousin Mingzhu downstairs in the hospital. She knew you were angry with her again. She was afraid that you would hurt your health, so she specially came to see you. Please don't be angry with her. Qin Shik winked at Feng Ling, and then turned her eyes to Mrs. Feng, whose face instantly darkened. So this was Mrs. Feng's daughter, Feng Mingzhu? Boss Li's fiancée? Feng Ling's gaze met Feng Mingzhu's. Feng Mingzhu only glanced at her indifferently, gave her a polite smile, and then walked past her. When she walked past, Feng Ling could clearly smell the faint, noble perfume on Feng Mingzhu's body. It smelled very good. It was a very elegant fragrance that made one feel unattainable with just a sniff. Mom, I didn't mean to make you unhappy, but this kind of big event, since it has been decided a long time ago, it's normal for me to suddenly cancel it. Feng Mingzhu walked up to Qin Qiu and sat down next to her. She wrapped her hands around Qin Qiu's arm, put her chin on her shoulder, and said coquettishly, "Don't be angry. He is the only person I really like in my life. I really don't want to give up. I'll talk to the elders of the Li family and ask them to take back their plan to cancel the engagement, okay?" Qin Qiu didn't like to talk about family affairs in front of outsiders. She didn't want to say that the Li family broke off the engagement directly, so she just secretly glared at her daughter next to her. You came here because of this, not because you're afraid that I'll be angry, but because you're afraid that I'll stand on the same side as your father and grandfather and really agree to cancel the engagement? Feng Mingzhu was a little helpless. Mom, I've said it. Anyway, I won't cancel it. I'm going to marry Li Nanheng. A cousin, you should go home and say this to Aunt. My little brother Feng Ling is here. He is Mr. Li's subordinate. Aren't you afraid that these words will be spread to his ears? Qin Shik giggled and moved closer to Feng Ling's side. At the same time she said, "Right, little brother Feng Ling?" Feng Ling's little brother expressed, "I won't casually spread such irrelevant topics. However, it's indeed better to discuss Madame Feng's family matters at home. After all, I'm an outsider. Besides, this is a ward." That's right. Even if cousin Mingzhu is eager to get married, don't tell everyone you meet that you have to marry into the Li family. In the future, how will our little brother Feng Ling look at his boss, Feng Ling? She didn't know that Boss Li had such a thing to deal with. She almost couldn't look at him anymore, okay? Qin Qiu sighed. Obviously, she didn't want Feng Mingzhu to continue to be so willful. She said helplessly, "Let's not talk about this for now. Since you're in the hospital, you should stop. Usually your family spoils you. Now your father and grandfather's decision is also for your own good." After saying this, Qin Qiu lowered her voice and said, "If you marry into the Li family, and that boy Li Nanheng really has no feelings for you, will you be a widow for the rest of your life? What we want to see is that you can live a happy life, not sit in the cold palace blindly for the sake of pursuing a love, understand?" Feng Mingzhu looked very calm, but it was not difficult to see that she was a very stubborn person. She insisted, "But the Li family would rather marry my dead sister's cenotaph than marry me. Isn't this a blatant insult to me? Why should I let them insult me like this? The more they do this, the more I want to marry them." "Child, why are you always so immature? Qin Xiu's face suddenly became cold. They said that they wanted to marry your sister's cenotaph, just to fulfill the agreement of the marriage. On the one hand, the agreement would be fulfilled, and on the other hand, you would be able to marry a man who can really make you happy. It seems that the Li family is quite thoughtful, and they have politely asked for our opinion. Why do you have to be so extreme? I'm not extreme. I'd rather marry a dead person than marry a living one. I can't bear this insult. Feng Mingzhu was provoked by these words, and her original calm appearance faded. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. I have to let them know that I, Feng Mingzhu, am not a person who can be so perfunctory. Qin Xiu immediately glared at her fiercely. What did you say? Feng Mingzhu's expression froze. Only then did she realize that she had said something she shouldn't have said, and violated her mother's taboo. She immediately withdrew her hand from Qin Xiu's arm, and looked very angry. But she didn't dare to say anything else. Her sister died in the sea before she was 1 year old, but she couldn't mention the word death for so many years. At this time, Feng Ling's eyes fell on the mother and daughter, who seemed to be not very happy. Although Mrs. Feng, Qin Xiu, lowered her voice, her natural acuity and her extremely sensitive hearing, which had been trained since she was a child, allowed her to hear these words clearly. Would rather marry a cenotaph. She would rather marry a dead man? Did she hear wrong? Or did the eldest daughter of the Feng family say something wrong? Little brother Feng Ling at this time, Qin Shuk leaned close to her ear and said, Don't laugh at me. My cousin and my aunt usually talk like this. My aunt is relatively strict with my cousin's education. My cousin grew up under the pressure of the family, and has a rebellious temperament, so as long as they talk about something, they will act like this. They don't seem happy, but my aunt only has one precious daughter, my cousin, and in fact, she loves her very much. Feng Ling paused. Although she knew that it had nothing to do with her, and she shouldn't ask, there was still an inexplicable question in her heart. She turned to look at Qin Shuk, who had been pestering her, and asked in a low voice, Is she the only daughter? But why did I just hear Mrs. Feng mention your second daughter? Qin Shuk simply leaned close to Feng Ling's ear, and whispered a few words. When Feng Ling's eyes gradually became clear, she retreated and then said with a smile, Little brother Feng Ling, what brand of shower gel do you usually use? Why do I feel that you smell better than me? Chapter 823. Although she knew that Qin Shuk was just doing this out of kindness, Feng Ling was still not used to being approached like this. Qin Shuk didn't continue to pester her, and only said, Are you going to stay in the hospital for a few more days? Then I have nothing to do these days. I'll come to the hospital often to accompany you, okay? As she spoke, she seemed to have thought of something. She turned around and brought in 2 big bags of fruits that were placed on the bench outside the ward. These are the fruits I bought just now. I almost forgot when I was talking with cousin Mingzhu outside the ward. I don't know what you like to eat, so I bought a lot of them. You can choose whatever you like. Really, no need. Before Feng Ling finished speaking, Qin Shuk enthusiastically put the fruits on the square table by the bed, and took out the fruit knife and disposable fruit plate she bought together, and began to cut the fruits. Feng Mingzhu and Mrs. Feng didn't have a pleasant conversation. After sitting on the sofa for a while, Mrs. Feng got up and said that she was leaving. Feng Mingzhu didn't look very good, but she still got up obediently. Little brother, we're leaving. I just wanted to see you. But I didn't expect that my daughter's problem hasn't been solved yet. Sorry to disturb you. After speaking, Mrs. Feng didn't wait for Feng Ling to speak, and turned to leave. It could be seen that she was really in a bad mood. Just now, Feng Ling only noticed Qin Shuk, who had been cutting the fruits, and didn't pay much attention to what the 2 mothers were talking about. She didn't know why she was unhappy, so she could only nod as a farewell. However, after they went out, Qin Shuk gently put the cut fruits on the fruit plate, took Feng Ling's hand, and told her to do the aerosol treatment on time, to listen to the doctor's words and to rest more. She nagged a lot, and in the end, Feng Ling had to personally send them into the elevator. And then because Qin Shuk was unwilling to let go of her hand, she sent them to the main entrance hall, on the first floor of the hospital. It was raining outside. The rain was not heavy, and they could walk a few steps to get into the car. No one took an umbrella. Seeing that it was raining outside, Qin Shuk didn't continue to pull Feng Ling out. She turned back and reluctantly said goodbye to Feng Ling. Although the rain was not heavy, some light rain still drifted in and landed on Feng Ling's head. In just 2 or 3 minutes, her clean and soft short hair was slightly wet on her forehead, but it made her calm and fair face look even more handsome and exquisite. And the loose light blue hospital gown on Feng Ling's body, coupled with Feng Ling's slightly gentler expression, really made Qin Shuk's heart pound wildly. Feng Ling. Qin Shuk was about to get into the car. After thinking for a while, she turned and ran back to Feng Ling. She didn't know if it was because she ran too fast or because she was simply blushing, but she panted and said, "Can I come to the hospital to see you tomorrow?" Feng Ling looked at the mischievous little girl in front of her. For the first time in so many years, she was a little upset about her gender. It seemed like she was about to hurt a girl's heart. However, there shouldn't be too many opportunities to meet in the future. If it was just a simple love, it would be much better than finding out the truth. I'm not sure if the doctor allows me to see people often, and the base also has some rules. If it's not necessary, Miss Qin, you better not come, Feng Ling said euphemistically. The taste of being rejected was always not good. Although she knew that Feng Ling would definitely not agree, hearing such a straightforward answer, Qin Shuk was still a little disappointed. She lowered her head, raised her hand, and tugged at Feng Ling's cuff weakly. Then I can't see you again in the future. Feng Ling looked at the little girl's white and delicate fingertips, and was about to push her hand away when Qin Shuk suddenly clenched her cuff. How about this? I won't disturb you these days, but on the day you leave the hospital, I'll come to see you, okay? Miss Qin, it's still raining outside. Let's talk about it later. If you keep standing like this, you will catch a cold. Feng Ling didn't answer but calmly reminded her. Qin Shuk's eyes lit up at this moment. She wanted to say that if she caught a cold, she could take this opportunity to get an injection or be hospitalized in the hospital so that she could get close to him. But when the words came to her mouth, she saw that Feng Ling didn't seem to be interested in her at all. So she had to shut her mouth and reluctantly let go of Feng Ling's sleeve. Then I'll go back with my aunt and cousin first. If we have a chance to meet again in the future, I'll ask for your phone number. Can you give it to me? Next time? There shouldn't be a next time, right? Feng Ling just smiled lightly. Then let's talk about it next time. As if hearing a glimmer of hope from such hopeless words, Qin Shuk immediately grinned, turned, and ran back to the car quickly. She then turned back to wave at Feng Ling and entered the car. The tall black Hummer galloped in the rain and stopped in front of the hospital. When Li Nanheng rolled down the window, he saw such a scene. The girls stood in the rain and reluctantly tugged at the sleeves of the boy. And then the boy seemed to promise her something. The girl blushed and happily turned to run to the car not far away. On the passenger seat of the Hummer, there was a tablet that had not been turned off. On it was a video conference of the base that had just ended. The screen was dark, and the conference had just ended a minute ago. Li Nanheng, who had opened the window to light a cigarette, played with the silver lighter in his left hand, glanced indifferently at the boy standing in front of the hospital, and his dark eyes darkened, and even a lot of coldness entered his eyes. The phone rang at this time. It was Xiao Su. Li Nanheng took a look at it and picked it up. Speak. Boss, I don't think I can come back tonight. I don't think Feng Ling has a big problem in the hospital. If you are worried, ask Kay and the others to come to accompany him, Xiao Su said apologetically. Xiao Su said apologetically. But Feng Ling doesn't like staying in the hospital. He pays attention to the matters in the base. If there's a mission, he'll definitely rush back to the base, even if the treatment period hasn't ended. It's good to send someone to watch over him, in case he always thinks of himself as an invincible soldier. The treatment hasn't ended yet, but he can't wait to go back to train and take on missions. Well, I'm near the hospital. I'll be here tonight. Li Nanheng's tone was cold. Chapter 824. Seeing that the car Qin Shuk took had driven away, Nanheng pressed the lighter with a paw sound, pushed open the door, got out of the car, threw the lighter in his hand back into the car, and walked straight to the boy in front of the hospital. Summer was almost over, and the autumn rain in Los Angeles was a little cold. So today, Lee Nanheng was dressed differently from before. He wore a black double-breasted trench coat over a well-ironed suit. His whole body exuded coolness and arrogance, and his cold and flawless face, like that of an ancient Roman royal family, attracted countless gazes outside the hospital in just a few seconds. But before the group of people outside the hospital came back to their senses, the handsome man had already walked up the marble stairs in front of the hospital, dragged the collar of the boy in a light blue hospital gown over, and said coldly and indifferently, "Have you forgotten what I said to you? Members of the base are forbidden to fall in love. Do you want to be driven out of the base? Or do you have a brain that only knows how to talk about love at such a young age?" Feng Ling's collar was almost pressed against her head by the man's sudden tug. The moment she turned back, she saw Li Nanheng's unhappy expression and couldn't help but explain. Mrs. Feng came to the hospital for a checkup. Miss Qin accompanied her here and met her in the hospital. What a coincidence! Nanheng snorted and continued to drag her in. Being dragged by the collar, Feng Ling's footsteps were not very steady, and she said helplessly, "It's true. What's more coincidental is that I also saw your fiancé today, boss." Nanheng didn't stop at all. He dragged her into the elevator, pressed the button to close the door of the elevator, and the floor where Feng Ling's ward was, and glanced at her coldly. "What fiancé?" Feng Ling hurriedly raised her hand to adjust her collar that had been slightly loosened. As she did so, she said, "It's Mrs. Feng's daughter. I think her name is Feng Mingzhu. They said she's Boss Li's fiancé, isn't she?" Li Nanheng didn't take Feng Mingzhu's matter to heart at all. But when the word fiancé suddenly came out of Feng Ling's mouth, he felt a little uncomfortable. He glanced at the boy who was a head shorter than him. "So what if I am? So what if I'm not?" "Nothing much. I just said that their whole family came to the hospital today, and I coincidentally met them. It's not what you think, boss." Feng Ling's tone was as usual. Li Nanheng glanced at her indifferently. "If I really marry Feng Mingzhu in 2 years, what do you think?" Feng Ling was silent for a moment before answering calmly. "What do I think? Of course, it's to wish you and the future Mrs. Li a happy marriage and a son soon." Feng Ling happened to raise her head as she spoke, her eyes bright and beautiful. "But boss, do you like Miss Feng or that Miss Qin? Since we're really going to get married, I think it's better to be faithful. I see that you seem to mind Miss Qin very much. Then Miss Feng." The two of them were on completely different channels. The veins on Li Nanheng's forehead throbbed. "When did I say that I minded that Qin shook? Boss, don't you dislike her being too close to me? If I'm not interested in her, could it be that I'm not allowed to fall in love?" Li Nanheng was so angry that he laughed. Then he glanced at Feng Ling with a sneer, and strode out when the elevator stopped on the floor where the ward was. Feng Ling looked at his back with a confused expression, and followed him out. When they were about to return to the ward, Li Nanheng turned back to look at her. Seeing that she was walking slowly, he reached out to grab her wrist, and dragged her into the ward. The moment the door was slammed shut with a pung sound, before Feng Ling could react, she was abruptly pressed against the door. The man's hand was firmly pressed against her shoulder, and could not be moved. Feng Ling looked at the man standing close to her in a daze. She wanted to struggle but couldn't. "Boss." The man looked down at the fair-skinned boy, glanced at the boy's short hair that was slightly wet because of the rain, and said with a deep gaze, "In the future, don't listen to rumors. I don't have a fiancé. Don't put such unnecessary labels on me, understand?" Feng Ling. "I didn't label you, boss. I just heard it. As long as you don't hear it from my own mouth, everything you hear is nonsense. My own life and my own marriage won't follow the bullshit arrangements of my family. Feng Mingzhu, that kind of rich young lady, isn't my cup of tea. Just looking at her makes me lose my appetite. In the future, don't mention this name in front of me. Okay. Remember what I said." "Ah, what?" "No matter now or many years later, no matter in the base or anywhere else, as long as you don't hear it from me, don't take it seriously. This is the same for everyone. Don't listen to anyone's hearsay." Feng Ling looked at the warning and seriousness in Li Nanheng's eyes and nodded sincerely. I see. Seeing that Feng Ling really remembered it, Nanheng turned on the light switch on the wall by the door, and the lights in the room instantly turned on. Feng Ling was not used to the sudden light. She narrowed her eyes slightly and moved her head aside. The man lowered his eyes and saw the fluffy hair by the boy's ear, which made his heart itch. He was really a guy who could always make people's hearts itch. Nanheng pulled his hand away from the door behind her with a cold face, ignored the boy's blank and innocent expression, and said lightly, Xiaosu won't go back to the hospital today. I just went to the Li Corporation to attend a meeting this morning, and passed by the hospital. I'll stay with you tonight. No wonder boss was dressed so formally today. He didn't look like he just came from the base. It turned out that he went to the Li Corporation. She had never seen boss in a suit like this. Many years ago in the orphanage, she just caught a glimpse of him. However, when Li Nanheng wore a suit, he looked different from other elite men. Although he was dressed in a suit, he still looked tough and ruffian, which was a different kind of handsomeness. When they got out of the elevator, Feng Ling noticed that when several nurses passed by looked in Li Nanheng's direction, their faces were all red with shyness and infatuation. But at that time, it was Nanheng who suddenly carried her back to the ward that ruined this handsome feeling. It was still so rough that she had nothing to say. Chapter 825. Li Nanheng looked back and was about to speak when he suddenly saw that Feng Ling seemed to be looking at his clothes. He expressionlessly took off his trench coat, threw it on the sofa, and casually pulled open the collar of his shirt. It was just a simple and casual action of quickly taking off his clothes, but there was an inexplicable hint of wildness in his manliness, causing Feng Ling's gaze to stiffen. What are you looking at? Nanheng glanced at her coldly again. Feng Ling quickly looked away and walked away from the door quickly. When she was about to return to the bed, she suddenly heard the man say, What? Look at your attitude. Are you not convinced? No. Feng Ling tidied up her slightly messy collar and said, But boss, you really don't have to be unhappy because of the matter between me and Miss Qin. I don't have any feelings for an innocent little girl like Miss Qin, but she doesn't have any bad intentions, so I can't hurt her heart too much. Hurt a little girl's heart? Nanheng raised his eyebrows and looked at the young man who had already tidied up his hospital gown. The young man's face was clearly very likable, but he was usually too cold and heartless, but he showed a little rare patience to a little girl. He sneered coldly and casually unbuttoned the exquisite and expensive cuffs of his shirt. In the end, opposites attract each other. It's rare for you to be soft-hearted. Feng Ling just smiled, and her short black hair, which had just been wet by the raindrops, fell on her forehead. Boss, if you have to think so crooked, then I can't help it. I always remember the rules and regulations of the base, and will not violate the rules. Okay, remember what you said. Nanheng didn't continue to harp on this matter. After glancing at Feng Ling, he unbuttoned his shirt, took it off, and went into the bathroom bare-chested. Since the last time she saw Boss Li directly take off his clothes here, Feng Ling had been used to it, but she still looked away. Not long after, Li Nanheng changed his clothes and came out. When she turned back, she noticed that he had only changed his suit and shirt. In the bathroom of her ward, there was the suit he changed out of last time. After washing it, he sent it back here. Feng Ling didn't know where to put it, so she simply threw it in the closet in the bathroom. It was just a set of clothes, and he actually remembered that it was here. Should he say that boss's memory was too good, or that he didn't take it away because he had other intentions? However, even if he had other intentions, what else could he be after? Feng Ling didn't understand why this thought popped up in her mind. Li Nanheng came out and approached her. Ignoring the strange emotion that flashed across Feng Ling's eyes, he asked mildly, Have you done the atomization today? Feng Ling knew that he was no longer angry, so she didn't continue to argue about Qin Shuk. She glanced sideways at the rain outside the window, took a small step to the side, and instinctively kept a relatively safe distance from him. She answered, Yes, I've done it. From this morning to just now, I've done it twice. The doctor said I'm recovering well, Just as Nanheng was about to say something, the door of the ward was suddenly knocked, and then a young nurse came in. When the nurse saw two good-looking men standing inside, one tall and one thin, although it was not the first time she had seen them, she still couldn't help blushing. After all, she had come in with the chief doctor several times before, but today she came in alone. That, Mr. Feng, the doctor asked you to go to his consultation room. He wants to check your lungs and wounds again. The nurse stuttered while glancing at them from time to time. They were obviously two extremely rare men, but even though their auras were completely different, there seemed to be something even colder than indifference in their bones. Furthermore, although that tall man's gaze towards her wasn't impolite, that icy rain-like coldness really made her shiver. It was so cold that she didn't even dare to say what she wanted to say next. She hurriedly shut her mouth, turned around and quickly walked out, not daring to look back. Are you hostile to all the girls in the world? Feng Ling couldn't help asking. The nurse came to inform me to go to the consultation room. How did she offend you? Why did you glare at her like that? Li Nanheng withdrew his cold gaze toward the door and said indifferently, Did I glare at her? If you didn't, would the nurse be so scared that she ran away with her tail between her legs? Then she must have seen wrongly. The man's expression didn't change. Feng Ling. She couldn't stand this man in front of her, so she turned around and was about to go out. As soon as she turned around and took 2 steps, the back of her collar was grabbed again. Li Nanheng put one hand in his black trouser pocket and grabbed her collar with the other, like a devil who could stretch out its claws at any time. As long as he was unhappy, he would never let go of the puppet in his hand easily. The man's expression was cold and arrogant. I'll accompany you to the consultation room. It's very cold in the corridor. Put on a coat and then go. Feng Ling thought that even if he wanted to accompany her to the consultation room, he didn't have to grab her collar again and again, right? Fortunately, she still had a loose vest inside. Otherwise, if she was pulled like this sooner or later, he would find the breast wrap inside. She twitched the corner of her mouth and calmly turned to pick up the new coat that Xiao Su had bought for her. When she put it on, she saw that Li Nanheng seemed to be satisfied with her eyes, so she finally went out. When she went out in the corridor, she was inevitably baptized by the gazes of a group of nurses. Feng Ling walked forward expressionlessly, and Li Nanheng walked past her without shifting his gaze an inch. Although the two men were walking together, for some reason, the group of nurses blushed, and their hearts beat so fast that they felt that they were very compatible. Was it because of their height and figure? That's not right. Usually, the cutest height difference in everyone's eyes should be tall and big, while the girl is petite and exquisite. However, this slightly shorter and thinner little fresh meat next to him definitely looked more than 165 centimeters tall. He definitely wasn't the cute type, but they really matched each other inexplicably. Boss, when you walk with me in the future, can you keep a little distance? When they were about to walk to the consultation room, Feng Ling suddenly said in a low voice. Li Nanheng lowered his eyes and glanced at her. What distance? Chapter 826. What's wrong with that? Stop talking nonsense. The man put his arm around her shoulder coldly. At the moment when Feng Ling paused, he pushed her into the door of the consulting room. Go in and have a check. Don't talk nonsense. Feng Ling stayed in the consultation room for a full 40 minutes before coming out. Li Nanheng first smoked 2 cigarettes in the only smoking room in the corridor of the hospital. Feeling that it was almost time, he threw the cigarette butts into the fireproof trash can and strode out. As soon as he walked near the consulting room, he saw the door open and Feng Ling came out. She seemed to be in good condition. What did the doctor say? He just said that I'm recovering well. Feng Ling raised her eyes. Boss, the doctor has said more than once that I'm fine. I applied to you last time to be discharged from the hospital and go back to the base. Let's talk about it later. The man looked away expressionlessly, turned around, and walked toward the ward. Feng Ling followed him quickly, saying, But it's not necessary to stay in the hospital for 3 more days. The base also has certain standards for the wounded. You've just recovered, and you have to face high-intensity training every day as soon as you go back. If you cough or feel any discomfort because of the intensity of training, the members will think that 11 base lacks humane care for the wounded. It's useless for you to say that you're almost recovered. Listen to the doctor's arrangement and stay for a week. As he spoke, he had walked back to the ward. It was still raining outside. Li Nanheng glanced out and saw that Feng Ling was still thin, although she had nothing to do in the hospital these days. He said lightly, "Xiao Su has prepared 3 meals for you these days. Now Xiao Su is not here. What do you want to eat? I'll buy it." "No, boss, I'll just eat the simple meals in the hospital." Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows. "You want to eat the simple meals in the hospital, but it doesn't mean I want to eat them too. I'll go out and buy them. Why bother to come here twice? Tell me, what do you want to eat? Then anything is fine, boss, as long as you like it." Feng Ling expressed that she had almost lost all her desires under the oppression of the boss. "Okay, wait for me." With that, Li Nanheng turned and walked out. At this time, Feng Ling also glanced at the rain outside the window. She was about to chase out and ask him how to get out. After all, it was raining heavily. However, she had just taken a step when she suddenly paused. Why did she care so much? Was there a need for her to worry about a grown man? An hour later, Feng Ling was originally sitting on the bed waiting for her dinner, but as she waited, she almost fell asleep. Suddenly, she vaguely smelled the fragrance of roasted meat. She opened her eyes abruptly and subconsciously turned to look at the door. Sure enough, the door of the ward opened at this moment, and the tall man returned with 2 warm takeout boxes in his hands. When Li Nanheng placed the takeout on the table by her bedside, she opened the box and looked at the kebabs inside. The meat on the kebabs clearly smelled burnt and smelled especially fragrant. She clearly remembered that the food street she went to with Boss last time was very far away. Did Boss drive directly to the food street? Wasn't he afraid that he couldn't get out of the traffic jam? However, it wasn't hard to tell that Boss used a very fast speed to bring the skewers back after he finished roasting them. The taste didn't change at all. What are you waiting for? Didn't you say you wanted to eat it last time? Li Nanheng casually took out 2 of the best roasted skewers and put them in her hands. He used one hand to pick up the cigarette box that he threw on the table before leaving, threw it on the sofa far away, and then sat down at the table. As if afraid that Feng Ling would be pricked, he quickly took the meat off the skewers, put them all into the clean lunch box in front of her, and handed her a pair of chopsticks. "Eat quickly. Anything that is roasted must be eaten while it's hot. It won't taste good when it's cold." Xiao Su originally had something to do and couldn't come back today, but because of the sudden heavy rain, the matter was temporarily put on hold, so he simply rushed back to the hospital. Just now he happened to meet Boss Li outside. Now that he was outside the ward and saw this scene through the glass door, his mood instantly became extremely complicated. After all, this was the first time he saw Boss Li deliberately drive to the food street in the troublesome area, where traffic was easy to jam. He even carefully asked the boss for an insulated lunchbox and held it all the way back to the car, not caring that it was hot. At that time, he didn't even lock the door, and when he came back, he had been covering it with his coat, as if afraid of being wet by the rain. He sent it back to the ward, and then helped Feng Ling take off all the meat on the skewers. Not only did he take it off, but Boss seemed to want to feed it directly into Feng Ling's mouth. As someone who saw Boss driving out when he just came back, Xiao Su, who came back to see this scene, felt this was really not in line with Boss Li's usual cold and aloof style. No. Didn't Boss usually hate sickly and delicate beauties the most? Usually, whenever a member of the base asked for leave because he was sick or claimed to be unwell, Boss would roll his eyes impatiently. He really disliked those members who often felt unwell. But right now, Feng Ling was clearly in the hospital and couldn't move her hands or shoulders. But Boss took care of her in every way. Feng Ling, as usual, was no different from usual. She didn't notice Xiao Su's figure flashing by outside, and Xiao Su's expression, as if his jaw was about to drop off. Because Boss had helped her take off a lot of meat, she was afraid that it would really be cold, so she picked up the chopsticks and began to eat, with a smile on her lips. "Boss, aren't you going to eat?" Hearing this, Li Nanheng turned his head to glance at her. Because he saw that the corner of the boy's mouth was accidentally stained with cumin, he bent down to wipe it for her. However, when his hand was about to touch her, Feng Ling instinctively dodged slightly. Li Nanheng's brows moved, and he reached out to wipe it again. The man's fingertips instantly swept across the boy's lips. Feng Ling raised her eyes to look at him, and Li Nanheng's fingers also stiffened in an instant. It was clearly an incredibly warm and soft touch, but it made him itch from his fingertips to his heart. In an instant, the man's voice also turned cold. He withdrew his hand, took out a tissue, and threw it in front of her. "Wipe it yourself." Chapter 827. Feng Ling wiped her mouth with a tissue and glanced at him. She didn't understand what was wrong with Bosley. Why did this man seem to be in a bad mood? It was strange. In just a few minutes, Feng Ling was attracted by the pile of meat in front of her. She ate one bite after another happily. It seemed that this was the most delicious food she had eaten since she was a child, except for the food in the base cafeteria. Feng Ling didn't expect her appetite to be so good. After eating more than half of the food he bought, the man suddenly moved the lunchbox in front of her away. The chopsticks in Feng Ling's hand froze in the air, and she looked at him in confusion. "Boss, you eat so much at one time. Aren't you afraid of indigestion?" "Boss, you bought so much food. Should I eat it all up?" "There's no need for that. I bought so many so that you can eat more, not so that you can eat all of them. If a vegetarian suddenly eats so much meat in one meal, you might get indigestion and hurt your stomach. What if you blame me for that?" The man threw the lunchbox aside with one hand and lifted his eyelids indifferently. "At least you can return to the base in 3 days and resume training immediately. Otherwise, you'll have to take a few more days off because of your stomach discomfort." Feng Ling, however, when he mentioned returning to the base for training, Feng Ling felt at ease. It seemed that Boss didn't blame her for her mistake, nor did he intend to stop her from returning to the base. Feng Ling obediently gave up the plan to eat so much meat and got up to drink water. Seeing her so obedient, Li Nanheng was very satisfied. After all, she was a member of his team. It was better to be obedient than to make trouble everywhere and be unruly. This was the most intuitive thought in Li Nanheng's heart. After all, the skewers were more or less salty. A glass of water was not enough, so Feng Ling took her own cup and turned to the water dispenser to pour a glass of warm water and drink a few mouthfuls. When she was about to put down the cup, she suddenly heard Li Nanheng's voice. "How is the water temperature?" Feng Ling subconsciously held the cup and glanced at him. "It's not bad. It's not hot or cold. It's just right." Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows and curled his lips slightly. He said nonchalantly, "I happen to be thirsty. Bring it over, and let me have a few mouthfuls." Hearing his words, Feng Ling fell silent for a moment. She clearly felt that this was wrong, but since they were both men, and Boss didn't have a fixed cup here, he already said that he wanted to use her cup. He had no intention of treating her as an outsider. If she insisted on taking a disposable paper cup, Boss might lecture her again. Feng Ling was conflicted for a moment. She felt that she had stayed in the hospital for too long and was too free. She was actually conflicted. She walked over and was about to hand him the glass. Li Nanheng pressed her hand, lowered his head, and took a sip of water from the place where she had just touched. The man's cold and indescribably charming face made Feng Ling feel uncomfortable. She felt as though her hair was about to stand up, and her ears were filled with the man's words. Feng Mingzhu was not his fiancé. He had no fiancé. He wouldn't listen to his family's arrangements and marry a random woman. Why did she suddenly think of these words? Feng Ling was about to pull her hand back, but the man clearly hadn't drunk enough. He pressed her hand and continued to press his lips against the edge of the cup she had just drunk. After drinking all the remaining water in the cup, he let go of her hand. The water temperature is not bad. When the man let go of her hand, he indifferently glanced at the water dispenser not far away. "What's in the water dispenser in the hospital? What's in it?" Feng Ling hadn't returned to her senses and asked blankly. The man glanced at her meaningfully. "I'm not sure. But this water is a little sweet. Is it sweet? Feng Ling smacked her lips suspiciously. After a while she said, no, it just tastes like normal water. Seeing that Li Nanheng didn't speak, Feng Ling's heart inexplicably trembled. She couldn't tell what she felt, but she instinctively avoided his gaze, turned to the water dispenser, and took half a glass of water. She took another sip, then put down the cup, turned around, and licked the water droplets that fell from her lips, saying, it still tastes very normal. Boss was probably implying that the water was spiked with some kind of medicine. Every member of the base should be vigilant. If someone had drugged the water dispenser in her ward, it seemed that she would have to investigate the doctors and nurses who often came and went here. But there was no problem with the taste, and looking at Boss Li's expression, it didn't seem to mean what she thought. Feng Ling couldn't help licking her lips again. Boss, Li Nanheng looked at the boy's rare confused expression and plain face, and the way she licked her lips from time to time, which was particularly seductive. He actually had an impulse to go over and kiss her. Li Nanheng instantly withdrew his gaze, turned his head to the window, looked at the rain outside with his deep eyes, and then looked at the time saying, Xiao Su just came back. I met him outside. He is still staying in the lounge tonight. I'm in the ward. When Feng Ling heard that Boss was going to stay in her ward again, she couldn't help glancing in the direction of the bathroom. However, when Li Nanheng turned back and saw her expression, he immediately said coldly, do you think I will still take a shower in your bathroom? Do you think I really like to be seen by others? Don't even think about it. Feng Ling cursed in her heart. Boss, I don't mean that. I took a shower before coming back and just changed my clothes. That's all for tonight. The man's voice was indifferent and cold. But it was really not comfortable to sleep on this sofa last time, so I was called over by Xiao Su. Now that Xiao Su is back, I don't even have a normal place to rest. Feng Ling subconsciously pointed to her hospital bed. But when she remembered that Boss said she was cursing him to sleep in the hospital bed last time, she just pointed with her finger and didn't speak. Li Nanheng sharply glanced in the direction of her finger. You want me to sleep in your bed? Feng Ling smiled. If Boss doesn't mind, this is a hospital bed, of course. Li Nanheng turned to look at her hospital bed thoughtfully, got up, and suddenly walked over. After circling around the bed, he looked at the size of the bed seriously and said indifferently, it's just sleeping. I don't mind, but isn't it too crowded for the two of us to sleep in this bed? Sleep with the two of them? Did he mean that he wanted to sleep with her? Chapter 828. Boss, this bed is indeed too crowded for two people. I can sleep on the sofa. He really wanted to repeat the same old trick, but it seemed like this sentence had never had any effect in the past. Before Feng Ling could say the words on the tip of her tongue, Li Nanheng had already laid down, patted the empty space on the other side of the bed twice, and turned his head to look at her. Come here, lie down and have a try. Feng Ling didn't move. Why are you standing there? Lie down and see if it's too crowded. If it's too crowded, I'll continue to sleep on the sofa. The man's voice was flat but firm. Since he had said so, Feng Ling glanced at the empty space next to him and sat on the edge of the bed. However, as soon as she sat down, before she had time to decide whether to lie flat or on her side, her arm was suddenly pulled hard from behind, and she suddenly fell back unprepared. The moment she fell into the man's arms, Feng Ling rushed to get up, but the man steadied her body and pressed her to the empty space on the edge of the bed without saying anything. Feng Ling immediately lay motionless on the bed as if petrified. The man beside her stretched out his arms to test the distance. At the same time, he reached over her body and touched the side of her bed. Finally he commented, not bad. It's not too crowded to sleep two people. Feng Ling felt that she might have been a little too cautious in recent days, so she could only remain silent and did not say much. When Li Nanheng sat up, she still lay in the same position and looked sideways at the man next to her. All right, let's sleep like this tonight. When Nanheng got up, he pressed the bed under him. The softness of this bed is not bad. Last time I slept on the sofa for a whole night, and my back hurt for 2 days. With that, he got up to get a pack of cigarettes and a lighter, and said, If you're tired, go to sleep first. I'll go out for a smoke and come back. Feng Ling looked out of the window, the rain had stopped, and replied, Okay. The boy's voice was particularly soft. Li Nanheng, who was about to go out, suddenly paused, looked back at her, turned the silver lighter in his hand, and then turned to walk out. While Boss Li went out to smoke, Feng Ling hurriedly got up, locked the door from the inside, and rushed into the bathroom to take a shower. She had wrapped the chest cloth around her body for a day, and just now she vaguely felt a little sweaty. If she didn't take a shower now, she would probably be unable to fall asleep because of the sticky feeling on her body. Based on her understanding of Boss Li, she knew that he wouldn't smoke for too long or too short, and Xiao Su also returned to the hospital today. They would probably meet outside. The two men would go out to smoke and chat for at least 10 minutes. She would take a quick shower in these 10 minutes. 5 minutes to take a shower, 3 minutes to wrap the chest cloth, and 1 minute to put on clothes. Sure enough, in less than 10 minutes, when Feng Ling opened the bathroom door, she heard the familiar footsteps of a man approaching. In case Boss found out that she had locked the door, she quickly rushed over to open the lock inside, and then turned back to the bathroom to put the chest cloth and clothes she had just changed into the bottom of the laundry bag. When she was sure that she would not be found out, the door had already been opened. Li Nanheng bought a glass bottle of hot milk in the supermarket downstairs of the hospital. As soon as he entered the door, he heard the sound in the bathroom. Feng Ling seemed to have just taken a shower, and he could smell the shower gel wafting out of the bathroom. The man glanced at Feng Ling's wet hair hanging on her forehead, and then glanced at the boy's cheeks, which were much more tender than usual after taking a shower. He wanted to restrain himself, but he couldn't help looking down. He glanced at the collar of the hospital gown that the boy had buttoned up to the top, and didn't see anything he wanted to see. So he withdrew his gaze expressionlessly, walked to the bed, and put down the bottle of hot milk in his hand. I bought it on the way back. Drink some before going to bed. It can help you sleep. Feng Ling picked up a dry towel to dry her hair, and poked her head out of the bathroom door to say, Boss, I sleep very well. Drink it yourself. Really? Li Nanheng looked back at her and sneered. Last time I stayed here for a night, I heard you turning over at night. Are you sure you sleep well? Feng Ling. Isn't that because you, the great Buddha, came to my ward to sleep? Feng Ling put down the towel, feeling that if she really slept in the same bed with Boss Li tonight, she probably wouldn't be able to sleep. Okay, I'll drink it right away. After speaking, she continued to dry her hair. When her hair was half dry and only a little wet, she casually shook her hair and walked out. When she picked up the bottle of milk, she found that it was still hot, and immediately looked up at Li Nanheng. By the way, I asked someone in the supermarket to heat it up. The temperature is just right. Drink it. The man unbuttoned his coat, and after speaking, he swaggered to the bed, reluctantly leaving half of the space for her to go to bed. Feng Ling opened the lid, took a sip, and then smacked her lips. Li Nanheng had closed his eyes. There were a lot of things waiting for him to deal with when he returned to the Li Corporation during the day. He was exhausted and just wanted to sleep now. Hearing this guy smacking his lips, he closed his eyes and asked, Is it good? Not bad. Boss, you bought sweet milk. It's very delicious. Okay. The man seemed to be very satisfied, but he was also very tired. He closed his eyes and responded lightly, turned over, and fell asleep. Seeing that the man fell asleep in her bed in less than 10 seconds, Feng Ling sat by the side and drank milk, wondering whether she should go up to sleep or not. At the same time, she lowered her head to check her clothes and chest wrapping cloth. After drinking the milk, Feng Ling gently put down the bottle, turned around, and was about to return to the sofa when the man on the bed suddenly turned over at this moment. The man closed his eyes and said hoarsely, Come to sleep. Feng Ling was silent. He woke up. She looked back at the man on the bed. Boss, I'm not good at sleeping. I'm afraid it will affect the quality of your sleep. The man didn't speak anymore but turned sideways, leaving more space on the bed. He didn't talk nonsense with her, but obviously asked her to go up to sleep. Feng Ling walked back, and when lying down, she raised her hand and touched her chest casually. After making sure that she wouldn't be discovered if she didn't touch it carefully, she lay stiffly beside him. Chapter 829. No matter how accustomed Feng Ling was to being with a group of men, she was really not used to it right now. Li Nanheng was really tired and soon fell asleep again. The man's steady breathing was by her ear. She put one hand on herself, and the other hand clenched the bed sheet under her. She stared at the ceiling of the ward under the dim night light, and glanced sideways at the man who was sleeping soundly. It wasn't that she hadn't had close contact with him before. At least a few years ago, when Li Nanheng tested her personally, the two of them had restrained each other for a while because of close combat. At that time, the distance between them was very close, but the atmosphere at that time was different from now. At that time, it was the sweat and fighting on the training ground and her pride. But now, in such a quiet space, she felt a man lying next to her without any distracting thoughts. His breath was less than 10 centimeters away from her ears, and she could even feel the obvious gap between the man and the man she was pretending to be. Li Nanheng's masculine scent was vividly displayed. There was the smell of laundry detergent on clean clothes, and a very faint and somewhat intoxicating scent of tobacco. Feng Ling didn't know if the man's breathing when he was sleeping made her feel at ease, but she gradually closed her eyes. She didn't know how long she had slept. In her dream, Feng Ling felt that she seemed to be imprisoned somewhere and couldn't move her hands and feet. She suddenly woke up and almost bumped into the man's face when she turned her eyes. At first glance, she saw that it was Boss Lee who was still sleeping. Her heart beat even faster from the shock. She looked at the man's handsome face that was close to her, and then lowered her head to see that her calf was directly pressed by his long leg, and her two arms were held by him. She was completely held in the man's arms. Feng Ling quietly and gently pushed his hand away. When she got up to move his legs away, the man's brows suddenly furrowed. He abruptly opened his eyes in the darkness and looked at her with his sleepy and dark eyes. "What are you doing?" She wasn't sure if he knew the position he was in when he was sleeping, so she kicked his leg away and stood up. "I'm going to the bathroom." When Li Nanheng was asleep, he was like a sleeping lion. At this moment, he was like a lion that was suddenly awakened. His eyes were dark and dangerous. Perhaps it was his natural sensitivity, but after glancing at her again, he glanced at the bed under the two of them, and found that he had unintentionally moved closer to her side when he was asleep. He alone occupied almost 2/3 of the space. Without speaking again, he turned over and continued to sleep with his back to her. Feng Ling didn't know whether Boss Lee was unhappy because she woke him up or because of something else. But in this case, the more she said, the more suspicious she would be, so she simply continued to remain silent. She went to the bathroom and stayed for a while. After going to the toilet, she slowly returned to the bed. However, as soon as she climbed into bed, Li Nanheng suddenly stood up. She couldn't help looking up at the man who suddenly stood up. Seeing that Li Nanheng also turned to go to the toilet, she lay down again. However, after the man came back from the toilet, he felt that the ward was a little stuffy, especially when the two of them slept on the bed together. He was about to open the window when he saw that it was raining intermittently outside. It was not suitable to open the window in the autumn rain season. It was easy to catch a cold, not to mention this was a ward, and there was a patient living in it. He glanced out of the window into the dark night, took off his shirt and walked back. Still not sleeping? After taking off his clothes, Li Nanheng casually threw the jacket and black t-shirt aside, and then untied his belt. Under Feng Ling's stunned expression, he seemed to hesitate for a moment, and finally fastened the belt again, and walked to the bed. In the 30 seconds when the man untied and fastened his belt, Feng Ling could only see his perfect upper body with the dim night light in the ward. Every inch of his abdominal muscles was extremely sexy, and he only wore this pair of black trousers. The simple trousers that matched the combat uniform wrapped around his two straight, slender, and powerful legs. As the silver buckle in front of the belt was buckled again, it was even more sexy, as if he was tempting her to commit a crime. He sat back on the bed and saw that Feng Ling's eyes were open a moment ago, but now they were closed. "Are you a corpse, Feng Ling?" Boss, go to sleep. The man snorted. How can I sleep like this? Look at your expression. If I don't know, I might think I'm going to rape your corpse. Feng Ling. He lay down with his upper body bare, turned over, and looked at Feng Ling. He moved his fingers and directly pulled the boy's ear. But his eyes were as indifferent as water. Why are your ears so red? Do you have a fever? Feng Ling didn't answer, closed her eyes, and pretended to fall asleep. Seeing that this guy had learned to shut up, Li Nanheng didn't embarrass her. The rain outside the window was still pattering, knocking on the window, making the ward particularly quiet. The boy's breathing gradually stabilized from the beginning, and unexpectedly, he had a good night's sleep. But why were his ears red all the time? Maybe it was really too stuffy in the ward. 3 days later, Feng Ling was discharged from the hospital. When she was discharged, Kay and the others happened to be on a mission, so they passed by the hospital to take a look. Li Nanheng's car was naturally parked downstairs. During the week when Feng Ling was hospitalized, Li Nanheng appeared a total of 3 times. The first and second time, he directly stayed in her ward, and the third time, he came to pick up the recovered wounded on behalf of the base. It was actually very stressful to be a glorious wounded in the base. But fortunately, Feng Ling had a good interpersonal relationship in the base. She usually had good grades and was low-key and silent. So this time when she was injured and hospitalized, no one in the base found fault with her or took the opportunity to spread her nonsense. Finally, after getting the doctor's signature, Feng Ling returned to the ward, changed out of the hospital gown, picked up the combat suit, and was about to put it on. She changed her clothes very quickly, and because she knew that she was going to be discharged today, she had already changed into the clothes that she usually wore in the base. She wore a loose sling vest over the chest wrap, which made her look especially like a man, and a loose white t-shirt over the vest. Chapter 830. Just like that, Li Nanheng leaned against the wall by the door and looked thoughtfully at her clothes that she hadn't put on her coat yet. Feng Ling's heart skipped a beat. She instantly rejoiced that she had already prepared a few more measures. Otherwise, Boss Li would definitely see through it. I've been waiting for you downstairs for half an hour. Is it so troublesome to leave the hospital? Do you need me to buy you a set of men's skincare products so that you can clean up from head to toe before coming out? The man glanced at her leisurely. Feng Ling happened to have her back to him and couldn't see his chest. From this angle, she really couldn't see anything. She could only see that the boy was really especially thin. Hearing the man's footsteps seem to be approaching, Feng Ling quickly picked up the black combat uniform and put it on. She quickly pulled up the zipper with one hand and raised her hand to push her short hair back. She looked at the man who had already approached. Boss, we can go now. However, the man had already walked up to her. He lowered his eyes to look at her, pretending to be calm, and then glanced at her ears, which were no longer red. He recalled that her ears had also been red after she fell asleep that night, and he stared at her with a deep gaze for a while. Boss! Feng Ling raised her eyes and lowered her voice. Is there anything else? Li Nanheng glanced at her, and his gaze fell on her neckline. The neckline is crooked. Oh. Feng Ling raised her hand to adjust the neckline. When she raised her eyes again, the man had already retracted his gaze and turned to leave. After returning to the base, it was inevitable that she would be greeted by a group of base members who were close to her. Even Feng Ling herself did not expect that the family of the mayor of Foy State, Mr. Ted, who had gone on the cruise with Qiao Fei to rescue her, had actually come to the base early. When they learned that she had been injured in the rescue incident, they were very grateful and apologetic and brought many gifts for her. At that time, Feng Ling was in the hospital. According to the rules of 11 base, outsiders were not allowed to visit her, so they sent all the gifts to the base and to her room. Those things included many expensive, but very useful electronic products, and a military medal that Mayor Ted personally awarded to Feng Ling. Such things shouldn't be awarded casually, but Mayor Ted made an exception and gave it to Feng Ling. After Feng Ling returned to the base, he personally called her and expressed his gratitude. He was also very grateful that she had chosen to throw the child off the cruise. Otherwise, If the child had been injured in the explosion, their family would probably live in pain for the rest of their lives. When Feng Ling returned to her room, she saw a pile of things on the bed. After receiving a call from Mayor Ted and his wife, she knew what was going on. In this season, Los Angeles gradually became cold. When she returned to the base in the afternoon, the wind was already howling outside. Boss Lee allowed her to rest today and resume training tomorrow, but Feng Ling still insisted on going to Team 1 to train in the wind and rain. After Kay, Tam, and the other two returned from their mission, she would continue to receive high-intensity sniper training. It rained heavily for several hours. When the training was over, every member ran back to their residence like a drowned rat. As always, Feng Ling walked back alone. Just as she was about to walk back downstairs, she suddenly felt a weight on her wrist. She turned her eyes abruptly and was stunned when she saw Deputy Drill Master Qiao coming over with an umbrella. Before she spoke, she was suddenly dragged into the corridor by Qiao Fei. After entering, Qiao Fei threw the umbrella aside and looked at Feng Ling, who was soaked. He looked her up and down, and then his eyes fell on her face. "Are you all right? Are you all right?" Seeing the worry in Qiao Fei's eyes, Feng Ling almost forgot that her secret had been discovered by him. Her face remained unchanged, and she just looked at the young and handsome man in front of her. "Thank you for your concern, Deputy Drill Master Qiao. I just inhaled some thick smoke. After a few days of treatment, I'm fine." "No matter how fine you are, you can't work so hard. Do you really think you are a man? You just left the hospital and went out to train in the heavy rain. The sniper team has no training schedule today, but you went to Team 1 to find Han Jin. He is a big man who doesn't know how to be flexible at all. Why did he let you train when you said you wanted to train? Can't he let you come back to rest?" "Deputy Drill Master Qiao, I'm a member of the base. I've missed so many days of training, and the strength of my limbs will definitely be greatly affected. If I miss one day of training, it will only affect the time when I can really pick up a sniper rifle in the future. I'm responsible for myself. Drill Master Han also knows what I mean, so he asked me to resume training directly. Besides, it's common for me to train in such a heavy rain. I've been in the base for so many years, so I won't be affected just because of this afternoon." And she looked at him seriously. Although her voice was low, it was exceptionally serious. "I am a man." Qiao Fei looked at her for a while and smiled. "Are you still worried that I will tell your secret? Don't worry. I believe in Deputy Drill Master Qiao, but I hope that you can treat me as a man like before. In the explosion of the oil tank, I just inhaled the smoke and was not injured by the explosion, nor did I suffer any serious internal or external injuries. I'm already very lucky to be alive. I just hope that I can become more and more stable in the base in the future, so gender doesn't matter to me. If everyone can do it, I can do it too." "Deputy Drill Master Qiao, please forget what happened on the island at that time. I'm just a member of the sniper team, and don't need any special treatment." Qiao Fei frowned. "Okay, I won't give you any differential treatment, but you have just been discharged from the hospital. I haven't seen you for a week. You have lost so much weight and went to train in the rain. If you continue to work like this, if you really faint on the training ground one day and are sent to the dressing room to be stripped naked, you won't be able to hide it. You'd better pay more attention to your body." "Okay, I will pay attention to it. Thank you, Deputy Drill Master Qiao, for reminding me." Feng Ling looked straight at him, and her attitude was still neither servile nor overbearing. She did not have any sense of guilt, because her secret was caught by others. "Deputy Drill Master Qiao, it hasn't been long since you joined the sniper team. When did you become so familiar with Feng Ling? You have just been discharged from the hospital and returned to the base. What did Deputy Drill Master Qiao remind you of?" Suddenly, a clear and low voice rang outside the door beside them. Chapter 831. As soon as she met Li Nanheng's gaze, Feng Ling took a step back. Her expression didn't change and she greeted indifferently, "Boss." Qiao Fei wasn't sure if Boss Li had heard the conversation between him and Feng Ling. He turned his head to take a look, but didn't find any clue from Li Nanheng's expression. So he didn't say anything but explained. Feng Ling was injured on a rescue mission on the cruise ship with me. I saw her jump into the sea, because of the explosion, and personally fished her out of the sea. I didn't have time to visit her during the week in the hospital. Seeing that she came back today, I asked her a few questions, and reminded her to pay attention to her health during training, and not to work so hard. Li Nanheng glanced at Xiao Fei's face indifferently. Why didn't you go with the members of the sniper team today? Why did you let the 4 members who are still in training go there by themselves? Kay and the other 3 members are very good at shooting. It's enough for them to go on this kind of mission. If the mission is too dangerous, I will definitely go with them. Xiao Fei smiled lightly. Boss, Feng Ling is also a member of the sniper team. You are unhappy that I didn't go with the other 4 members. But you are unhappy that I care about another member. It's really difficult for me to be an assistant drill master. However, when Xiao Fei said this, he continued to meet Li Nanheng's eyes, only to find that Boss Li's eyes were extremely cold. Compared with the coldness, what made Xiao Fei more nervous was the coldness and ruthlessness in his eyes. Since Xiao Fei entered the base, he knew that Boss Li was not someone to be trifled with, but at this moment, he felt that Boss was really not someone to be trifled with. However, Boss Li was really too concerned about Feng Ling. Did Boss Li also know Feng Ling's secret? Impossible. First of all, Li Nanheng was the person in charge of 11 base. He had responsibilities. If he knew Feng Ling's gender, no matter from which angle, he had to act according to the rules and regulations of the base. It was absolutely impossible for him to let Feng Ling stay here. Nor could he rest assured to let her go on all kinds of missions. And if Boss had known that Feng Ling was a girl, he wouldn't have been so merciless as to let her receive all kinds of intensive training. And the intensity of the intensive training was even heavier than that of Kay and the other rough men. Go back to Team 2 if you can't do it. There are plenty of drill masters in the base who are proficient in long guns and sniper rifles. Li Nanheng said mercilessly. All the drill masters in the base were excellent members who had been trained here for many years. They had long been accustomed to Boss Li's merciless and vicious tongue. But they also knew that although Boss's mouth was not pleasant, every time he went out on a mission, he cared about the lives of every member, and would never allow anyone to die. Except for his bad temper, everything else was good. Xiao Fei was already used to it. Especially after he joined the sniper team. Boss Li's gaze became more and more unpleasant. Now, Li Nanheng had already approached, and his noble and cold face was only left with an uneasy sense of oppression. Boss, it's fine that you usually make fun of us, but there are members here. No matter what, you have to give me the deputy drill master some face, right? Xiao Fei stood beside Feng Ling, and laughed to save some face for himself. Then he glanced sideways, and hinted Feng Ling to leave first. Feng Ling turned around quietly, and was about to leave when Li Nanheng suddenly stopped her. Stop, did I say you can leave? Feng Ling paused, and suddenly turned to look at him. The man walked to her side, leaned over, and his cold breath hit the back of her ear. When you first returned to the base, you went to Team 1 to look for Han Jin. What did you say at that time? I said that I had been delayed in the hospital for so many days, and my limbs felt a little stiff. I needed to resume training immediately. Otherwise, it would affect all aspects of the sniper team in the future. Feng Ling answered calmly. Did I ask you to take a break this afternoon? Yes, boss asked me to rest, but I asked to go back to training. So you felt wronged when you encountered a rainstorm during training? No, I didn't. If you didn't feel wronged, why would Deputy Drill Master Qiao bring you here and comfort you? If you feel uncomfortable, shouldn't you tell your boss directly? When did Deputy Drill Master Qiao become your part-time psychiatrist? Li Nanheng's voice was light and cold, but Feng Ling clearly felt that this man seemed to be very unhappy. But Feng Ling still heard the meaning behind his words. He was warning her to keep a distance from Xiao Fei in the future. Xiao Fei was the deputy drill master of the sniper team. She didn't have much contact with him, except during training. Why did he suddenly remind her to keep a distance? At most, he was saved by Xiao Fei on the island last time. And he was caught talking here today. That's all. Standing by the side, Xiao Fei raised his hand to his lips and coughed. He cleared his throat and said, Boss, Feng Ling is a member of the sniper team. He was injured right before my eyes. It's only right for me to say a few words of concern. I don't like hearing your words. Li Nanheng didn't wait for Feng Ling's words but Xiao Fei's. He suddenly smiled, but his eyes were cold. The moment he turned his eyes, it seemed that he could freeze Xiao Fei into a popsicle and insert him into the crack of the wall. You pulled her into the corridor and whispered to her. You two men, are you concerned about her? Did he mean to provoke Xiao Fei? Feng Ling looked back at the strange light in the eyes of the two bosses. One was cold and indifferent, and the other was smiling. She immediately shook her wrist, that was a little sore from training. The rain outside had already stopped, but she was wet and looked extremely embarrassed. Unlike the young master of the Li family beside her, even though he was wearing the same uniform as everyone else, he still looked noble and luxurious. Just by standing beside her, her aura would make people feel pressured and extremely cold. In addition, Xiao Fei, who always showed a smiling face, but was actually not simple, only felt that it would be extremely troublesome if her gender was known by Boss or Xiao Fei. Boss, Deputy Drill Master Qiao, I'm still wet. Can you let me go back to take a shower first? Otherwise, if I really catch a cold tomorrow, I'm afraid I'll really faint on the training ground. At that time, I'll lose the face of the sniper team. Feng Ling shook her wrist and raised her hand to press her shoulder. Chapter 832. Feng Ling didn't wait for Boss Li to speak, turned around, and walked upstairs quickly. Li Nanheng looked at the guy who didn't take him seriously at all, and watched her back, and his eyes sank into unprecedented darkness. In just 2 minutes, Xiao Fei felt as if a century had passed under Boss Li's eyes. Hearing the footsteps that were gradually getting higher and farther upstairs, he immediately smiled. Boss, you know my temper. I'm nice to everyone in the base. Feng Ling is now my subordinate. I watch them train every day and more or less have feelings for them. But boss, you're usually not close to anyone. Why are you so special to Feng Ling all of a sudden? Li Nanheng put his hand in his trouser pocket and asked coldly. What's special about him? Although Feng Ling does look like a little girl, he is still a man. Boss, don't take pity on him. We are used to being vegetarian in the base. I can understand your loneliness, but Feng Ling is straight. Even if you want to turn him, he may not be willing to accept you. Li Nanheng opened his lips and said, You think too much. That's good. After all, boss, you are the only heir of the Li family. The elders are all waiting for you to marry a wife and give birth to a great-grandchild or great-granddaughter for them to hold. If you turn gay, Xiao Fei didn't finish his words. He just smiled meaningfully and didn't finish his words. Li Nanheng didn't look at him again, turned and went upstairs with a swish, and strode upstairs. Boss Li and a member of the sniper team lived in this building. Xiao Fei didn't live here, so he had no reason to go upstairs. However, he thought of the way Feng Ling went upstairs without looking back and Feng Ling's indifferent expression in front of Boss Li. Boss probably didn't know that she was a woman. But who was Li Nanheng? He was a cold bystander, who seemed to stand outside the secular world. Even if he didn't spend much time with Feng Ling, with Li Nanheng's keenness, it was impossible that he didn't notice or suspect something. After some thought, Xiao Fei picked up his phone and walked out. Feng Ling had just returned to her room. This time, the windows and doors couldn't be locked from the inside. Only the bathroom had a lock, so she entered the bathroom directly. As soon as she took off her clothes, her white body was exposed to the air. She undid the chest-wrapping cloth on her body, while looking at herself in the floor-to-ceiling mirror. After untying the cloth on her chest, she was about to turn around to turn in the hot water, when she suddenly heard her phone ring. She picked up her phone and saw a message from Xiao Fei. Feng Xiaoling, does Boss Li know your secret? Feng Ling looked at the boy he had specially added in the middle of her name. No matter how she looked at it, it was an eyesore. She stared at the phone screen for a while with a straight face and replied, He doesn't know. Xiao Fei, that's good. Girls should remember to protect themselves when living with a group of men, especially when you live next door to Boss Li. If you really find it inconvenient, you can apply to move out. I also have a few empty rooms in my building. I can make one for you. Feng Ling. No need. Boss doesn't usually enter my room. Other than the fact that he drank too much Xiao Fei. Are you sure it's safe to live next door to Boss Li? Why did he have an inexplicable feeling that Boss Li would eat Feng Ling up at any moment? Feng Ling. It's very safe. My personal privacy has not been threatened or violated. Thank you for your concern, Deputy Drill Master Qiao. I'm going to take a shower. See you on the training ground tomorrow. After replying, Feng Ling put the phone aside and turned to take a shower. Receiving such a reply, Xiao Fei didn't know what to say. He wanted to say good night again, but when he saw Feng Ling's words of thank you, Deputy Drill Master Qiao, for your concern, she didn't even call his name directly. It could be seen that although Feng Ling was young, it was clear that she knew what to do in her heart, so she would keep a distance and wouldn't cross the line easily. The sound of the bathroom next door continued. Li Nanheng stood on the balcony of his room and vaguely heard the sound coming from the bathroom next door. He stood with his long legs against the light, his left hand in his trouser pocket, and he was still wearing the combat uniform that he wanted to take off but found it a little cold, so he put it on again. He turned his head to look at the light on the balcony next door, and his deep eyes glowed. After taking a shower, Feng Ling put on her clothes in the bathroom, opened the locked bathroom door, rubbed her wet hair, and walked back to the bed. The pile of gifts sent by Mayor Ted and his family on her bed had not been cleaned up. She put down her hand that had been rubbing her hair, and was about to go over to collect those things when she suddenly heard a text message on her cell phone. She thought it was from Xiao Fei, so she didn't rush to read it. After putting those things on the bed one by one on the table and in the cabinet, she picked up her cell phone. She turned on her cell phone and saw the words Boss Li. At the same time, there were only 2 cold words from Boss Li on the screen. Come over. Feng Ling raised her eyes and turned to look outside. She saw the light on the balcony next door, thought for a moment, put down her cell phone, and turned to walk out. When she arrived next door, she raised her hand and knocked twice on the door. After a few seconds, the door opened. The man's tall and slender figure stood in the door, his sharp eyes scanning her from head to toe. His tone was cold. What took you so long? I was tidying up the things sent by Mr. Ted and his family, and didn't have time to look at my cell phone. Are you interested in those gifts? As Li Nanheng spoke, he turned and walked in. Feng Ling watched the man's back and followed him in. She didn't answer his previous question and only said, Boss, did you call me over for something? The window on Li Nanheng's balcony was open, and there was a thin laptop on the solid wood table by the balcony. The man pointed to the laptop. I want you to look at something. Hearing this, Feng Ling walked over. The moment she reached the table, her shoulders suddenly sank. The man's strong palm pressed down on her shoulder, asking her to sit down. When Feng Ling raised her head to look at him in surprise, the man pointed to the laptop with his chin. Open it. The password is 9632. Chapter 833. Take a look at the things inside. There are no women in the base, only a group of rough men. And I don't have any secretaries or assistants around me. These documents usually need a careful, tight-lipped person to sort out. On the one hand, you fit the category of tight-lipped and have strong self-control. On the other hand, you are very serious and meticulous in everything you do. Besides, you live very close to me, so it's convenient for you to sort things out. I'll leave this task to you in the future. The man withdrew his gaze from the computer screen and looked at the boy sitting at the table. After looking at it for a while, Feng Ling found that most of the documents were not particularly secret, but there were indeed some secret documents in the D disk of the computer. Each of these documents required a password, which meant that Boss Li had to tell the password in person before opening it, so it would not involve the important secrets of the base. She nodded. Yes, except for training and tasks. As long as I have enough time, I can do it. Don't you want to ask why I specially asked you to come over to sort out these? The man glanced at her face. Boss, since you called me over and told me the password to your computer, it means that you've decided to use me after some consideration. Since you've decided, and you said that I'm tight-lipped, I don't need to ask why. I forgot to mention one of your strengths. Your ability to accept things is really good. Li Nanheng's voice was very light, but with absolute command. No matter what confidential documents you see, you must keep your mouth shut. Can you do that? Feng Ling's hands left the computer keyboard, stood up, and turned back to look at the man who was more than a head taller than her. Don't doubt the people you use. As long as boss trusts me, I can do it. Feng Ling didn't expect that boss would stand so close to her. After saying this, she closed her mouth and stood there, not knowing whether to step back or not. The room was also very quiet after her words. Li Nanheng watched the boy who stood up and turned around. The two of them stood very close to each other. So close that when Feng Ling spoke, the faint fragrance of her body, and the mint smell of freshly showered and brushed against his neck. His eyes instantly revealed an unknown darkness. After about 4 or 5 seconds, Feng Ling moved the chair that was blocking her, and retreated a certain distance. Boss, do you have anything else to tell me? Feng Ling said, pointing to the time on the wall. I have to do balance training in the dormitory at night. I just returned to the base, and need to recover bit by bit. If I don't do balance training in the evening, I'm afraid I can't hold on for the whole day training tomorrow. Li Nanheng glanced sideways. My space is big enough. You can do balance training here. I can also see how your sense of balance is now. Feng Ling glanced at the training cushion placed next to her. Considering that she could do balance training alone in her residence, she just needed to bend her arms and lie prone on the ground for an hour. She didn't think she would be discovered, so she didn't refuse. She walked over, picked up the training cushion, and laid it on the ground. Then she habitually took off her shoes and lay down on her stomach. She kept her whole body balanced, raised her head, and used her elbows and toes as the fulcrum. Her posture was standard, and she could maintain her balance for a long time. She was very confident about this. Li Nanheng glanced at her incredibly white and tender feet, and then moved his eyes to her motionless and slender back when she was doing balance training. He walked over and watched her maintain this posture. Right now, Feng Ling was wearing a set of loose black trousers and a loose white t-shirt. This was what she usually wore when she slept, but because she was lying down, the loose clothes drooped down, and it could be clearly seen that Feng Ling's waist was different from that of a man's. Especially since the boy had just showered and came over. His hair was half dry, with a few strands hanging on his cheeks and forehead. Li Nanheng stood on the side. His legs were long and slender, and his side profile was noble. He did not speak, and his eyes were as deep as the abyss. His fingertips slid across the black cell phone he had just picked up, and suddenly, he took a photo of the back of the boy lying prone on the ground. His cell phone was muted, so there was no sound when he took the photo. Feng Ling was doing balance training seriously and did not look back. One was doing the training, and the other stood by and watched. After about half an hour, Feng Ling suddenly paused, stood up, and looked back at the tall man. Boss, I'll affect your rest if I do the training here. I'd better go back to my room to continue. This kind of balance training was simple, but no matter how many years people had practiced it, as long as it lasted more than 10 minutes, they would sweat all over, and Feng Ling was no exception. Although she had just taken a shower, there was obviously some sweat on her face, and there was also some sweat around her white neck and collarbone. It does affect my rest. Go back. These cold words immediately liberated Feng Ling. She turned and walked out of his room quickly. It was not until the door was closed by Feng Ling from outside that Li Nanheng looked at the soft cushion on the ground again and closed his eyes. In his mind, the scene of the boy's white toes bending slightly on the soft cushion because of too much force, and the boy's slender back, and a certain feeling began to rise from his lower abdomen, and it was steaming hot. Li Nanheng suddenly opened his eyes and stared at his crotch with an ugly expression. F*CK. It was just a very ordinary balance support movement in his room, and he actually had an erection. At this moment, Nanheng looked at the disobedient little brother in his lower body, which not only did not disappear at all, but also gradually raised up because of a certain image in his mind. In an instant, his eyes became cold and ruthless, and the color was as strong as the deep sea at night, dangerous and low. He was a man, absolutely a straight man. But he actually had an erection in front of a man? The door that had just been closed was suddenly knocked again, and then Feng Ling came in again. She didn't look at his eyes but just stared at the pair of shoes she left on the ground, saying, "Boss, I left my shoes here." She quickly ran over to put them on, and then quickly turned and ran out. Nanhing watched Feng Ling run in with a pair of white and tender little feet, put on her shoes and went out. He watched Feng Ling's back quickly disappear in front of the door, and then she slammed the door outside. Chapter 834. Feng Ling had just walked out of the door in her shoes, when she suddenly heard footsteps approaching in this direction. She subconsciously felt as if her back was burning, and couldn't help speeding up to rush back to her room. However, she suddenly heard the sound of the door being locked behind her. Click. Feng Ling paused and couldn't help looking back at the door of Boss Li's room. Did she hear that sound correctly? Did Boss suddenly lock the door from the inside? What did she do to make Boss lock the door in such a short period of time, as if he hated her to the core? Just when Feng Ling was confused and didn't know what happened, Nanhing had entered the bathroom with a dark face, slammed the bathroom door, turned on the shower, and took a cold shower in the early autumn rainy night. It wasn't until he had washed himself clean that he walked out with a cold expression on his face. When he was about to take a cigarette, his eyes suddenly fell on the soft cushion on the ground that hadn't been put away. He walked over with a dark look and bent down to put away the soft cushion, but there seemed to be a faint smell of someone on the soft cushion. It was a very, very faint fragrance that he didn't know how to describe. It was an indescribable body fragrance that was usually covered by the smell of shower gel. Damn, how could a man have body fragrance? Nanhing glanced at the soft cushion on the ground again, rolled it up and threw it aside. Then he looked down at his little brother, who was about to raise his head again. He pursed his lips coldly, turned around, picked up a box of cigarettes, and walked to the balcony. At night, 11 base was quiet. The slogans and gunshots that usually sounded on various training grounds had long disappeared at this time. It was so quiet that one could even hear the howling in the mountains and jungles not far away. It had been 3 months since Feng Ling was hospitalized due to injury, and the weather had already entered winter. In order not to affect the stretching of their movements, the members in the base still wore the same black uniforms as in summer during training. They only added a very thick layer of something similar to knee pads on the knees and elbows to prevent frostbite. However, because there was a lot of physical exercise during training, even if the weather was a few degrees below zero, they still sweated all over. Years of exercise made every member very good physical fitness, and they didn't easily catch a cold. Except for the explosion on the cruise ship, Feng Ling had not been sick much, and she had been training hard in the past 3 months after returning to the base. After 3 months of training, she, Kay, and the other 3 had successfully obtained the sniper rifles arranged for them by the base, and learned some basic knowledge of how to operate a sniper rifle. Xiao Fei could tell that Feng Ling really wanted to keep her gender a secret. In the beginning, he more or less took special care of her. Later, when Feng Ling clearly expressed her stance, he gradually stopped treating her as special. However, during every sniper training session, he would stand behind the other 4 and even hold their waists. When it came to Feng Ling, he had to maintain an appropriate distance, and was not allowed to casually hug her. After all, she was a girl. Although he liked her very much, Feng Ling's character was really too cold, and she kept expressing her attitude. Even if Xiao Fei was moved, he didn't even have a chance to take a step closer to her. More importantly, Boss Li often inspected by the side, and a casual glance from him could freeze people to death. At 5:30 in the afternoon, there were several gunshots on the training ground in the ice and snow. Feng Ling was the last one to hold a sniper rifle and shoot at the target 300 meters away, but she was also the only one among the 5 people who aimed at the center ring at such a long distance. Seeing that she actually hit the bullseye 300 meters away, Kay put down the sniper rifle in his hand in disbelief and turned to look at Feng Ling. Fuck, not bad. Last time, Deputy Drill Master Chow said that many people may not be able to hit the bullseye 300 meters away after getting a sniper rifle for a year. How long have you been holding a sniper rifle? Are you trying to beat the four of us with your training results? Feng Ling put down the gun and looked at the bullseye in the distance. It's just a coincidence. If I shoot again, I'll probably miss it. Motherf asterisk her. If I can be as lucky as you in the sniper rifle assessment next month, boss won't have to kick me every time he sees me. Tam sneered and then glanced at Feng Ling's indifferent expression. How on earth did you find such a good target? This is 300 meters, not 100 meters. That's right. When we just got the sniper rifle, Bosley, such a strict person, told us to keep calm and not to rush too close, because after more than 100 meters, every 10 meters is equivalent to a very difficult obstacle. However, you easily hit the bullseye 300 meters away. You might as well be the only one in the sniper team. The four of us should go back to Team 1 and play close combat. Kay walked up to Feng Ling with a smile, raised his hand, and patted her shoulder. Come on, shoot again. Anyway, boss is in a meeting today and is not here. I'll take you as my master for the time being. Teach me, how did you find the target so easily? Feng Ling rolled her eyes at him and warned him to take his hand away. But Kay was too familiar with her for so many years. Not only did he not let go of her hand, but he also leaned against her shoulder and signaled her to shoot again. Hurry up. We're all watching. As he spoke, Kay put his arm around the back of Feng Ling's neck and leaned in to say, Boy, you're so thin. I really wonder how you can withstand the explosive force of a sniper rifle. Feng Ling's eyes widened, and her face turned red. Feng Ling was about to speak, when suddenly a force came from behind. Kay, who was holding her like a brother, was pulled away. He turned to look at Xiao Fei with a dumbfounded expression and asked blankly, Deputy Drill Master Xiao? Xiao Fei glanced at him. What did you do just now? Kay thought for a long time, but couldn't figure out what he did wrong. Why was he thrown away by the Deputy Drill Master so vigorously? He looked at the other three who were also stunned, and then at Feng Ling, who always looked cold and indifferent. He coughed and turned back to say, Xiao, brother Xiao, I didn't do anything. Chapter 835. Kay was a little speechless. They were all brothers of the same family. They fought together in the mud pit of the training ground. It was normal for them to hug each other. Wasn't it normal for men to put their arms around each other's shoulders? Why did this have anything to do with the image of the sniper team? Usually, Bosley didn't like this and was strict with them, so they were used to it. When Bosley was here, none of them dared to mess around. But now Deputy Drill Master Qiao also looked murderous. Xiao Fei didn't look at him again, but turned to look at Feng Ling. Feng Ling, come with me. Feng Ling put down the sniper rifle she had just picked up and turned to follow him out without saying a word. When they were a certain distance away from the training ground, Xiao Fei looked around indifferently. Seeing that no one was approaching, he turned his eyes to Feng Ling's face. I remember Kay said that your birthday is in winter, right? Probably in November? Which date? Xiao Fei asked. I'm not sure when I was born. I've told you more than once that I'm an orphan. I don't know much about my infancy. My birthday was decided by someone for me. Feng Ling explained simply. I'm not sure when I was born. Said it in November? Yes. Xiao Fei nodded with a smile. Okay, it's already mid-November. Tomorrow is Saturday, and the training will end earlier in the afternoon. How about I invite you out for dinner? Just take it as a make-up birthday for you. Deputy Drill Master Qiao, I'm not sure when my birthday is, so I don't think it's necessary. Besides, why don't you? In recent years, many brothers in our base who are popular often go out to eat and drink for 2 days on their birthdays. As for you, you haven't celebrated your birthday for several years. I used to regard you as a careless brat, but now only I know that you are a girl. A girl's mind is more or less sensitive and fragile. If you are ignored for a long time, your heart will become more and more depressed. I think it's better to take you to eat delicious food tomorrow and let you be yourself for a day. It can be regarded as a birthday party with you. Xiao Fei said as he took out a small velvet box from his pocket. I bought you a birthday present last week. It's a pair of white diamond earrings. I didn't pay much attention to your ears before, but I found that you don't even have an ear piercing. Kay and the other men have pierced one ear, but you don't even have an ear piercing. Should I give you this earring or not? If you give it to me, I don't know how you should wear it. If you don't, you are the only girl in the entire base who is suitable to wear this kind of thing. Feng Ling was amused by his tone and gave a rare smile. Even if I have an ear piercing, I can't wear it. You'd better keep it. If you meet any girl you like, just give it to her. I don't need these. The girl you like is right in front of you. Will you meet any girl you like in the future? Xiao Fei stared at her smiling eyes and said directly. Feng Ling didn't understand his words at first, but when she did, the young man in front of her had already raised his eyebrows and smiled at her. Feng Ling, who had received a confession for the first time in her life, was stunned. At this time, her hand was suddenly pulled up by Xiao Fei, and he put the velvet box with a pair of white diamond earrings into her palm. Take it. I'm not in a hurry to let you wear it, but you have to accept it. In the future, when you want to become a woman again, remember to wear this on your ears after piercing your ears. Feng Ling abruptly pushed the box back into his hand. I can't take it. Just take it. Xiao Fei's eyes suddenly became a little fierce. It's just a birthday gift. Why are you so reserved? No, Deputy Drillmaster Xiao. I have no reason to accept your gift, and I don't intend to change back to a woman. Before he could finish speaking, a figure suddenly approached from the side. Xiao Fei's sharp eyes saw the person approaching, and he quickly retracted his hand, directly grabbing the velvet box that had just been pushed back into his palm. When Han Jin approached, he caught a glimpse of Xiao Fei's calm expression, and then glanced at Feng Ling. He didn't know what Feng Ling was thinking with her head down, so he called her. Feng Ling, why are you in a daze? Drillmaster Han. Feng Ling looked back and saw him, and her expression became as calm as usual, as if nothing had happened just now. Why are you and Xiao Fei pulling each other's arm here? Boss Li asked you to go to his room to get the computer, and take the materials to the base conference room to find him. After Han Jin finished speaking, his phone rang. He looked curiously at the thing in Xiao Fei's hand. He didn't see it clearly, so he turned around and walked away while answering the phone. He didn't ask or stay any longer. Seeing that Han Jin had left, Feng Ling took a step back and nodded politely to Xiao Fei, who was about to hand the velvet box to her again. I'll send the materials to Boss Li first. With that, she turned to leave. Hey Feng. Xiao Fei was about to call her, but he saw that Feng Ling walked away quickly as if her feet were smeared with oil. He just couldn't help but want to celebrate this little girl's birthday and confess his feelings. Why did this Feng Ling seem to be frightened? She had been disguised as a man for too long and had never been confessed to before? Was it too sudden? Did he really scare the little girl? Boss Li's computer was currently only accessible to him and Feng Ling, and only the two of them knew the password. It was actually a very serious matter to go to his room to retrieve the information from the computer. Feng Ling went to get the computer without any distractions, found the information that Boss Li had casually told her last night, and put it on the table. Then she stood up with the computer and went out. She rushed to the base conference room. Several leaders of the base and several military leaders were inside. Feng Ling walked in silently, put down the computer, and was about to leave when Xiao Su, who was sitting next to Li Nanheng, suddenly said, Boss, in fact, Feng Ling is a good candidate. Last time in the hotel box, she dressed up as Boss Li, and she looked quite good. Hearing this, Feng Ling's eyes fell on Xiao Su's face, and then turned to Li Nanheng sitting in the center of the conference table. At the same time, everyone in the base conference room turned their eyes to Feng Ling, and even looked her up and down. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.